Chapter 1888. However, the soldier could not ignore it. Thus, he reined in his horse and turned it around. He squeezed the horse's belly and glanced at the people who had fallen. The horses were twitching. They were probably too tired. The soldiers kept wailing. However, they had only suffered some superficial wounds. There was not much of a problem. Thus, he said, "Military officer, call the doctor to treat them. At the same time, count the horses of the injured people and the horses of the uninjured people. Present them one by one." After speaking, he looked around at everyone. "Take advantage of the time when the military officer is counting. All of you should rest." After settling down, Li Jing dismounted from his horse and handed the reins to the guard. He stood with his hands behind his back and looked at Xianxia city not far away. This time, he came to Xianxia for two reasons. The first one, needless to say, was naturally to find Zhang Feng. The second one was to check on Xianxia. The current Xianxia's general, Jin Sheng, was an archer under his command. After the war was quelled, he was sent to guard Xianxia city. This old man used to be a brave general on the battlefield. Ever since he came to Xianxia, he complained every day about how desolate Xianxia was. There was not even a woman. Even the cows were male. His brothers had a hard time and so on. He came today to check. If it was really so desolate, then he would ask His Majesty to allocate some money and find a few women. After all, they had followed him before. Just as he was thinking about his experience, a voice came from behind him. "General, the number of people has been counted." Hearing this, Li Jing slowly turned around and glanced at the military officer. He said with a serious face, "Report it." "Yes, General." The military officer nodded and opened the report in his hand. As he read, he said, 50 horses are injured and can no longer walk. They need to be treated. 60 people are injured and temporarily cannot follow the army. The rest are not injured and can continue to march. Oh, Li Jing frowned. He did not expect the injuries to be so serious. In such a situation, he would have ordered them to rest. However, His Majesty's orders were very urgent. There was no time to delay. Thus, he said, "Those who are injured and cannot walk, stay here and recuperate. The rest will continue to march with me." In this era, it was difficult to raise war horses. The money spent on fodder could provide a family with food and clothing for a year. Thus, it was very precious. Moreover, a good war horse could often decide the outcome of a battle. Therefore, even if it was injured, it had to be treated. The soldiers also understood this, so they usually treated the war horses as their own brothers. No one had any objections to the commander-in-chief's order. After leaving the doctor behind, everyone got on their horses again and rushed towards Xianxia. In less than a moment, the gate of Xianxia city was in sight. These few words seemed to have some kind of magical power. After the soldiers saw them, they all seemed to have gone mad and ran wildly. However, this was also understandable. After all, they had been traveling for a few days and hadn't eaten much. Now that they finally saw people, how could they not be excited? Li Jing did not stop him. He took the lead and ran ahead. Soon he arrived at the city gate. Huff! Li Jing reined in his horse and looked up at the city gate. Then he looked at the guard beside him and said, "Go call the city gate." The guard accepted the order and waved his gilded banner, as if he was afraid that the people on the city gate couldn't see it. This was understandable. If you were going to call for the people on the city gate, you naturally had to reveal your identity first. "The people upstairs, listen up. The Minister of War, Li Jing, is here. Quickly open the city gate." The banner swayed in the air. The gilded Li word was incomparably eye-catching. Upstairs, the patrolling soldiers heard the roar and hurriedly lowered their heads to take a look. They saw a large banner swaying in the air with the word Li written on it. This frightened everyone. One had to know that Li was the national surname. Wasn't that person with the surname Li someone who could cover the sky with one hand? And now, the Minister of War, Li Jing, was downstairs. That was their immediate superior. How could they dare to be negligent? They all panicked. They informed General Jin Sheng and prepared things to welcome Li Jing. Jin Sheng, who was in the residence, quickly received the news. His first reaction was excitement. Firstly, he was a soldier under Li Jing. Now that his superior had come, he naturally thought highly of him. Secondly, the Turks had just been attacked by the heavenly lightning and had already retreated. That would mean that he had contributed greatly. However, he quickly realized that something was wrong. Why did General Li come just as the Turks were attacked? Could it be that General Li knew something? Or could it be that the heavenly lightning this time had something to do with General Li? It was possible. It was very possible. Back then, General Li had destroyed Xiao Liang and Wang Shichong, who had proclaimed himself as the emperor in Luoyang. He had also destroyed the largest separatist force in Jiangnan, Nanliang. There was also Pafu, who had taken the lead and destroyed Feng Huiliang, killing more than 10,000 rebels and drowning people. Wasn't that an unparalleled feat? Perhaps the heavenly lightning had specially descended because General Li was coming. In that case, General Li was the main contributor this time. Thinking of this, Jin Xing shuddered and quickly walked out of the residence. Chapter 1889. He wanted to greet General Li personally. Even if General Li was not his superior, he had to greet the heavenly thunder. He ran all the way and finally arrived at the city gate. At this time, the city gate had been opened. Seeing the neat and strict team, Jin Xing hurried forward. "General, I'm late. Please forgive me." He cupped his hands and looked at Li Jing with admiration in his eyes. Li Jing looked indifferent. In fact, he had a good impression of this subordinate. After all, he guarded a place and worked hard even if he did not contribute. So he said, "Get up and follow me into the city." After that, he squeezed the horse's belly and slowly walked into the city. The soldiers followed closely behind, raising a cloud of dust. The big banners swayed in the wind, looking solemn and solemn. Seeing that most of the people had entered, Jin Xing casually gave a few orders at the door and quickly followed. As soon as they entered the city, Jin Xing called Wu Pu, "Serve the general tea immediately. Go personally." Wu Pu also knew Li Jing's status and did not dare to neglect. He accepted the order and left. At this time, Li Jing had already entered the inner mansion. He was familiar with this place. After all, he had been here before. The inner mansion was where Jin Xing usually entertained guests. Normally, Jin Xing should sit in the main seat. However, since Li Jing was here today, his superior naturally sat in the main seat and Jin Xing sat on the side. The two sat upright. Before they spoke, Wu Pu came in with tea. He walked to Li Jing and carefully served a cup of tea. "General, please have the tea." Li Jing narrowed his eyes and glanced at Wu Pu. He seemed to have thought of something and asked in surprise, "You're the archer from before?" He vaguely remembered this person's figure in his mind. He seemed to be an archer, but he was not sure. Wu Pu was delighted. He did not expect that a small guard like him would be remembered by the general. He quickly said, "Yes, General. It's me." Li Jing glanced at Wu Pu, but this time he valued him more. "Good. Since you're in Xingzhou, assist Jin Xing well. You won't have followed me in vain." Wu Pu did not dare to say anything. It was the greatest grace to be valued by the general. He nodded repeatedly. Seeing that the general did not say anything more, he could only serve another cup of tea to Jin Xing and left in a hurry. Only Li Jing and Jin Xing were left in the entire inner mansion. The atmosphere was solemn. Li Jing was about to ask about Zhang Feng when Jin Xing spoke first. He suddenly stepped forward and half knelt on the ground. He said excitedly, "Thank you, General, for sending down the heavenly lightning." "Wait," Li Jing hurriedly interrupted. He was a little confused. What did he mean by sending down the heavenly lightning? Was he really that capable? Confused, he could only ask, "What did you mean by that? What lightning?" "You don't know?" Jin Xing was stunned because he had always thought that this was the general's doing. Now, the general didn't know? Was it not the general's doing? Impossible? Other than the general, who else could summon the heavenly lightning? It must be because the general was afraid that his achievements would shock the emperor, so he didn't say anything. Yes, that must be it. Therefore, he cupped his hands and continued, "General, last night, heavenly lightning struck down and killed the Turks who were stationed outside Xingzhou city. It also caused a big fire and countless casualties." "What?" Li Jing's eyes widened as he slammed the table and stood up. "Oh my God, what kind of explosive news is this?" Heavenly thunder descending? And even caused a huge fire? Countless Turks were killed? How could this be? How could such a thing happen? He instantly felt that his brain was not enough. Frowning, he paced in the hall with his hands behind his back. If these were true, it would undoubtedly be a great thing for the Tang dynasty. But this matter was a little strange. Why would there be heavenly lightning? And it happened to fall in the Turks' camp? The more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. He stopped and stared at Xianxia. Tell me, are you deliberately trying to take credit? Are you trying to deceive Lao Tzu? What hasn't Lao Tzu seen before? What kind of heavenly lightning is there? He hadn't cursed for many years. Since the founding of the Tang dynasty, he had been generous to others. Today, what this guy said was so unbelievable that he couldn't help but curse. However, this made Xianxia suffer. He had always thought that the heavenly lightning was the general's doing, but now it seemed that it was not at all. Not only was it not, but he was also scolded when he reported it truthfully. Damn it, there was no way to reason with him. However, he was the general and he couldn't scold him back. Therefore, he continued to be patient and said, "General, what I said is true. Last night, heavenly lightning indeed struck down. Not only did it kill a large number of Turks, but Xieli and the Turks also brought the tribes back to the grassland overnight. I am willing to use my head as a guarantee for what I said." He really had no other way. If the general didn't believe him, he could only use his head to prove his sincerity. Li Jing was certainly not a fool. Seeing this guy's solemn vow, his confidence began to waver. He knew in his heart that Xianxia was a steady person and would not deceive him for such a trivial matter. Chapter 1890. Moreover, he was a public official. This kind of thing couldn't be joked about. He knew that. However, this matter was simply too inconceivable. He had to take it seriously. So, he said, "Since this kind of thing happened, you must have evidence, right?" This sentence couldn't be more obvious. Since something had happened, there must be evidence to prove it. In other words, if you want to convince me, you can't just say a few words and take out some reliable evidence. Xianxia naturally understood the reason. He turned to the door and shouted, "Bring the Turk here." Now, only the Turk could prove what he said. This was also the reason why he left the Turk here. In a moment, the Turk was brought here. However, because of his disability, he could only sit on a stretcher. Li Jing didn't care about so many things. He was now concerned about what happened last night, so he asked directly, "What happened last night?" The Turk didn't know the identity of the person in front of him, but he knew Xianxia's identity. When he saw how respectful Xianxia was, he quickly told him what happened last night. As he spoke, he cried as if he had suffered a great grievance. In fact, he was also a victim. However, he was considered lucky. At least he was alive. It was unknown whether he was trying to please Li Jing or he was resentful in his heart. When he spoke, he didn't forget to curse Xieli. His voice was extremely mournful. After listening, Li Jing finally knew the whole story. He waved his hand to signal the Turk to leave. Then, he sat on the chair and carefully digested everything just now. The amount of information that the Turk said just now was too much. First, a big thing covered the moon. Then, lightning struck and the Turk camp was in a sea of fire. There were countless casualties. Then, Xieli and Tuli returned to the grassland with the army. Wait, what could fly to the sky? And it even attracted lightning? Why was this so familiar? It seemed to have happened in Chang'an City. Something that could fly to the sky? Zhangfeng? Could it be Zhangfeng? This big thing was Zhangfeng on it? According to the Turk's description, it was exactly the same as Zhangfeng in Chang. Back then, when Zhangfeng was in the sky, he also covered the sun. And now, this thing covered the moon? It was exactly the same. Thinking of this, he no longer dared to be careless. He looked at Xianxia and hurriedly asked, "That thing in the sky went to your place?" Xianxia was at a loss for words. How would he know where to go? There was nothing in the Turkic camp. After thinking about it, he could only honestly say, "This subordinate doesn't know." There was nothing in the Turkic camp. Li Jing frowned and thought to himself, "Oh no. If it was really Zhangfeng last night, he might be in danger now that a night had passed. Now that he was here on the emperor's orders to find this fellow, If something were to happen to him, it would be hard for him to explain himself. What should he do? His heart was burning with anxiety. He paced a few steps in the hall, then looked at Jin Sheng. Immediately send someone to find that thing from last night. After saying that, he seemed to have thought of something and added, prepare brush and ink for this general immediately. He had to report this matter to His Majesty. Zhang Feng's disappearance and the retreat of the Turks were no small matter. It was just that Zhang Feng, this dog, really knew how to hurt people. If not for him, would this general have accepted this troublesome task? How unlucky. At the same time on Mount Shao. Because of Zhang Feng's disappearance, the entire academy was so anxious that their feet didn't touch the ground. Their only goal was to find Zhang Feng. However, a day and a night had passed, and there was still no news of Zhang Feng. This made everyone very anxious, afraid that something had happened to Zhang Feng. The two women kept visiting Zhang Feng's friends, trying to find some clues. Unfortunately, there was no news at all. They were women and shouldn't be in public. However, their husband was missing, so how could they not be anxious? So, they didn't care too much. Unfortunately, the heavens didn't fulfill their wishes. In fact, the most anxious were Yu Shernan and the other old men. In their hearts, they regarded Zhang Feng as their disciple. Now that their disciple was missing, they were also very anxious. Even though they were old, they spared no effort to visit everywhere. However, Zhang Feng seemed to have deliberately hidden himself. They couldn't find any trace of him. After a discussion, these old men decided to enter the palace to meet His Majesty. This was because they knew that Li Shimin would definitely not leave this matter alone. As soon as Yu Shernan and the others returned from the palace, they were blocked by a group of students at the door. Mr. Bosher, what did His Majesty say? Are you willing to help? Mr. Say something. The students were all talking at once, looking anxious. However, Yu Shernan and the others didn't seem to be in a good mood. He frowned and waved his hand. Everyone disperse. We will think of a way to find Feng Zi. You kids don't have to get involved. After saying that, Yu Shernan waved his sleeves and walked back to his residence with his head lowered. Before he could take 2 steps, 2 figures blocked his path. I've already told you, Yu Shernan looked up impatiently. However, halfway through his words, he realized that it wasn't the students who came, but Jingshu and Zhang Yuyao. His expression finally softened. 2 girls, why are you here? Chapter 1891. This question was unnecessary. He knew that the 2 girls were worried about Feng Zi's whereabouts, so they waited for him here. However, he didn't know how to reply to them. Zhang Yuyao didn't care too much. Instead, she asked directly, Sir, is His Majesty willing to help find him? This? Yu Shernan frowned. He seemed to have something to say. He glanced at the students walking around and said softly, this matter is more complicated. You 2 girls don't worry about it. After that, he lowered his head and was about to walk back to his residence. Jingshu spoke again. Sir, why don't you come to our place to have some tea? Prince Zhang isn't here now. We sisters should do our duty as disciples. After that, she even bowed. It wasn't that she didn't care about Zhang Feng's whereabouts. She just noticed that Sir seemed to have something to say. It was probably because there were too many students here, so she had to come up with this plan. Yu Shernan stopped and frowned. He seemed to be thinking about something. At this moment, Chu Suiyang and the others walked up. Bashi, since the 2 girls invited you, why don't you go? Greetings to the 3 gentlemen. Jingshu bowed. Her original intention was to invite the 4 gentlemen over. She mainly wanted to ask about Prince Zhang's whereabouts. The 4 gentlemen were the great scholars of this generation. Naturally, they were more well-informed than a weak girl like her. Since Sir had agreed, she quickly said, Gentlemen, please. We sisters will go back and prepare some fragrant tea. After that, Jingshu pulled Zhang Yuyao and left. Yu Shernan didn't say a word during the whole process. However, it didn't mean that he didn't know anything. Instead, his heart was as clear as a mirror. Looking at the back of the leaving figure, he smiled. This girl may become Feng Zi's good wife in the future. That's right. Chu Suiyang stroked his beard and looked at Yu Shernan. He changed the topic. We have to talk about Feng Zi sooner or later. Since these two are so anxious, let's go and have a seat. Yu Shernan narrowed his eyes and nodded thoughtfully. In fact, he had seen through Jingshu's thoughts at a glance just now. As the saying goes, the older you get, the wiser you become. However, he was also happy in his heart. After all, it was a good thing that there was another person who cared about Feng Zi. Let's go and see how this girl's tea tastes. He waved his sleeves and walked straight to the two women's residence. Everyone smiled and shook their heads. Without saying a word, they followed behind him. Not long after, the four of them arrived at the residence of the two women. Sirs, please be seated. Zhang Yuyao greeted the four people while fiddling with the stool. The four of them smiled and found a place to sit down. Yu Shernan looked at the tea in front of him and took a sip. He went straight to the point and said, "Girl, you want to know what happened when we entered the palace, right?" Zhang Yuyao nodded. She did not expect Mr. to be so straightforward. He was not willing to say it just now, but now he was so proactive. She quickly said, "Yes, please tell us." Jingshu also nodded. She knew Li Shimin's identity. At the same time, she also knew that he would not sit back and do nothing. That was why she invited Yu Shernan and the others just now. She was sure that Li Shimin must know something. "Girl, Feng Zi is actually not in any danger. It's just that." Yu Shernan looked at the two women opposite him with a calm expression. When they entered the palace just now, Li Shimin said that Feng Zi was not in danger. It was just that they did not know where she was now. If he told this to the two women, they would be worried. After thinking about it, he changed the topic and said, "It's just that she won't be back for a while." When Chu Suiliang and the others heard Yu Shernan's words, they did not think much of it at first. However, towards the end, it became more and more strange. This was different from what Li Erlang said. Li Erlang only said that Feng Zi was not in danger. It was just that they did not know where she was. Now, from Bo Shi's mouth, how did it become that she would not be able to come back for a while? However, on second thought, this old guy should have said this because he was afraid that the two women would be worried. Well, it should be. However, what they did not know was that Li Shimin had also lied to them. In fact, he himself did not know whether Feng Zi was in danger or not. He only said that she was not in danger to appease the four people. The funny thing was that the four people took it seriously because they felt that Li Shimin would not lie to them. All of this, the two women did not know. Zhang Yuyao only felt that God had blessed Prince Zhang. She bowed to the four people and said, "Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. You can't do that." Yu Shernan hurriedly helped Zhang Yuyao up. His face was a little red. After all, he was the one who lied. A great scholar like him was strict with himself every day. Today, he actually lied. It was really embarrassing. However, when he thought that it was for his disciple, his back seemed to straighten up and said, "Girl, you don't have to do this. Feng Zi is a good person. Nothing will happen to her." These words made him feel guilty. After all, he did not know what was going on. Jingshu seemed to have noticed something. She picked up the teapot and filled Yu Shernan's cup. She smiled and said, "Since Prince Zhang is not in danger, when will he be back?" Chapter 1892. This, Yu Shernan frowned. This question stumped him. He really didn't know when Feng Zi would come back. Even the emperor didn't know. How would he know? Xueji saw that the situation was slightly deadlocked and quickly interrupted. "Girl, Feng Zi is someone who is going to do big things. We don't need to care about this." His words were more pertinent, and there was a double meaning in his words. The first meaning was that Feng Zi was now doing big things. As for what big things, they didn't know. The second meaning was that Feng Zi's matter was related to Li Erlang. Everyone shouldn't make wild guesses and shouldn't care about it. Of course, Zhang Yuyao couldn't understand these words because she didn't know who Li Erlang was. But Jingshu was different. Not only did she know who Li Shimin was, but she also knew everything about Li Shimin. Now the words of the four gentlemen were very obvious. They were meant for her to hear. Jingshu frowned as if she understood something. She smiled and said, "Thank you for your guidance." "You're welcome." Xueji waved his hand and then looked at the other three. "Everyone, let's go." Since the matter had been settled, there was no need to stay any longer to avoid attracting gossip. The other three obviously understood this. they slowly got up and prepared to walk out of the door. Seeing that the gentlemen were about to leave, as the future wives and concubines of the disciple, the two women naturally couldn't stay. They both got up and stood at the door. "Gentlemen, please take care." The four men waved their hands, indicating that they didn't need to send them off. After a while, they disappeared from the sight of the two women. Seeing that the gentlemen had gone far, the two women returned to their seats. Zhang Yuyao was actually a little puzzled by what the gentleman said just now, but it wasn't appropriate for her to ask directly. Now that there was no one around, she looked at Jingshu and asked, "Sister, why do I feel that there is a hidden meaning in what the gentleman said just now?" "Sister, you don't have to be like this." Jingshu smiled. She put her hand on Zhang Yuyao's hand and comforted her. "Since the gentleman heard from His Majesty that Prince Zhang is not in danger, it must be true. You don't need to worry too much." The stone in her heart had already been lifted. After all, she knew what kind of person Li Shimin was. However, she couldn't tell Zhang Yuyao about all this. Otherwise, with the other's temperament, the whole city would know about it the next day. However, Zhang Yuyao didn't know that. She couldn't help but worry. "You're right, but I'm just..." As she spoke, tears began to fall from her eyes. When Jingshu saw this, she quickly comforted her. "Sister, don't worry. Prince Zhang will be fine." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a series of knocks on the door, followed by voices. "Ladies, I'm a servant of the Zhang residence. Housekeeper Du sent someone to invite master." Hearing this, Jingshu quickly took out a handkerchief from her waist and passed it to Zhang Yuyao. With a concerned look, she said, "Sister, wipe your tears. I'll go out and take a look." Saying this, she stood up and walked out of the door. There were two men standing outside the door. One was fat and the other was thin. The striking words Tang on their clothes made Jingshu certain that these two were servants of the Zhang residence. Because no other residents would dress like this. Jingshu glanced at the two of them and frowned. "Why are the two of you here? Did something happen to the Zhang residence?" In her impression, the servants of the Zhang residence rarely went to the academy. Because there was Du Ziting, the housekeeper, in the residence. He would take care of everything. Unless there was something big that couldn't be solved, otherwise they would not easily disturb Prince Zhang. Think about it, if every trivial matter had to be reported, then how could Prince Zhang live? However, it was obvious that something big had happened this time. The two servants frowned and seemed to be thinking about something. Jingshu couldn't wait and hurriedly urged, "Hurry up and say it. Now that Prince Zhang is not here, I can take care of it." The two servants looked at each other and hesitated. Because before they came, housekeeper Du said that he would personally tell the matter to the old master. In the end, the two of them searched half of Shao Mountain but couldn't find him. So they came here, thinking that the old master should be here. But when they came here, there was still no trace of the old master. And housekeeper Du said that this matter was more important and must be decided by the old master. Now that the old master was not here, and Miss Jingshu was asking questions, it seemed that they had to tell Miss Jingshu. After all, Miss Jingshu was not an outsider. After making up their minds, the two of them looked at each other, as if they had reached some kind of agreement. The thin servant stepped forward and bowed. "Today, a madame called Xia came to the residence and said that she wanted to see the old master. She also brought a lot of dried flowers. Housekeeper Du had seen this woman before, so he sent us to ask the old master what to do." "Dried flowers? Madame Xia?" Jingshu frowned and vaguely thought of something. At that time, Prince Zhang seemed to have interacted with this woman and bought a lot of dried flowers. Moreover, Prince Zhang seemed to be particularly precious. Could it be this woman? No matter whether it was or not, she hadn't returned to the Zhang residence for a long time. She could take this opportunity to go back and have a look. Chapter 1893. In any case, Prince Zhang wouldn't be back anytime soon. Moreover, this Madame Xie might really be the same woman from before. If that was the case, then she would be very important to Prince Zhang. She had to keep Prince Zhang here. After making up her mind, she said with a serious expression, "Since Prince Zhang isn't here right now, I'll go back with you. Wait here while I tidy up." After saying that, she turned around and walked back to her room without waiting for their reactions. When Zhang Yuyao saw Jingshu coming back, she quickly wiped the corners of her eyes and stood up to ask, "Younger sister Jingshu, what's going on outside?" Jingshu smiled and stepped forward to hold Zhang Yuyao's hand. "Older sister Yuyao, a servant from the Zhang estate just came to report that a Madame Xie is looking for Prince Zhang." "Madame Xie?" Zhang Yuyao's beautiful eyes turned as if she remembered something. "I remember that a Madame Xie came to look for Prince Zhang before. She even brought a batch of dried flowers. Could it be this Madame Xie?" She clearly remembered that when this Madame Xie brought a batch of dried flowers, Prince Zhang said that he wanted to do business with her, to make some perfume. Of course, Jingshu also remembered this and smiled. "Older sister Yuyao is right. The one who came this time should be this Madame Xie. However, since Prince Zhang isn't here, I think that we should go back and meet this Madame Xie so that we won't be impolite." Zhang Yuyao couldn't help but nod. Younger sister Jingshu is right. Now that Prince Zhang isn't here, we should go back. After saying that, she changed the topic and continued, "However, we should first say goodbye to the four gentlemen." Jingshu nodded. "Of course, we can't be impolite. Let's go and say goodbye to the four gentlemen now." Zhang Yuyao naturally didn't have a problem with that, and the two women walked out together. When the two servants saw Zhang Yuyao and Jingshu coming out, they quickly bowed. "Greetings, young ladies." These two young ladies were the future madams of Zhang Mansion, so they didn't dare to slight them. Zhang Yuyao nodded and gestured for the two to get up. "You two prepare a sedan chair and wait at the door. My sister and I will come out in a little while." The two servants looked at each other and wondered if they would be punished for not completing housekeeper Du's order. She thought to herself, but she still agreed, "Yes." After giving her instructions, Zhang Yuyao flicked her sleeves and walked towards the classroom. Jingshu followed closely behind. It was class time now, so the four teachers should be in the classroom. They couldn't be found anywhere else. As expected, Yushernan was checking the students' homework in class. His hands were clasped behind his back, and his gaze was sharp. At this moment, he happened to see the two women walking over. He knew in his heart that the two girls usually wouldn't come to the classroom for no reason. Now that they suddenly came, he thought that there must be something. So he put down the book in his hand and went straight to the door of the classroom. He asked with a smile, "Girl, why are you two here? Is there something wrong?" The two girls quickly stepped forward and bowed. Zhang Yuyao smiled and said, "Teacher, there's something in the Zhang residence that we need to go back to solve. So we're here to say goodbye to you." Yushernan frowned slightly. What can happen in the Zhang residence? Is it very important? He didn't want the two girls to go back now. First, Fengzi wasn't here, and it wasn't good for the two girls to appear in public. Second, for their safety. The bottom of the mountain had just issued an edict of guilt. It was said that the Waterland Conference would be held soon. There would definitely be a huge crowd. What if there was some danger? How would he explain when Fengzi came back? As a teacher, he naturally had to take care of his students' family. However, the two girls obviously didn't think so much. Ever since Zhang Feng disappeared, they had nothing to do on the mountain. In fact, they had long wanted to go back to the Zhang residence. Now that they had an excuse, they naturally didn't want to stay any longer. So, Jingshu bowed and smiled. "Teacher, a Mrs. Xie came to the Zhang residence today. She said that she was Prince Zhang's former business partner. This time, she also brought a lot of dried flowers. So, we need to go back." "Oh." Yushernan stroked his beard. He remembered that Fengzi seemed to have mentioned this before. It shouldn't be a problem. Although he didn't want the two girls to go down the mountain, he couldn't say much. So, he nodded and said, "In that case, you can go. Remember to be careful. If you need help, just send someone to Shao Mountain." Old man doesn't dare to say anything else, but he still has connections. The two girls looked at each other and smiled. "Thank you, teacher." Yushernan smiled and nodded. "You're welcome. You can go." The two women bowed and saluted again. Then they turned around and walked towards the door. At this time, the palanquin outside the door was ready. Seeing the two girls coming, the servants quickly went up to greet them. "Hello, Mississippi." Everyone bowed in unison. Zhang Yuyao glanced at the crowd and waved her hand. "Get up and prepare to go back." The servants didn't hesitate. They all got up and pressed the palanquin. The two girls entered the palanquin and walked down the mountain. Shao Mountain wasn't very far from the Zhang residence. The servants' legs were quite agile. In a moment, the gate of the Zhang residence was in sight. At this time, a thin figure was standing at the gate of the Zhang residence. His eyes were deeply sunken, as if he hadn't slept for a few days. This person was the Zhang residence's housekeeper, Du Ziding. Chapter 1894. He raised his head with his hands behind his back and paced up and down the stairs as if he was in a hurry. From time to time, he would glance at the direction of Shao Mountain. But he didn't see what he was expecting and continued to pace up and down. At this moment, the servant behind him cheered, "Master is back." Du Ziding turned around abruptly and saw two sedan chairs of the Zhang residence slowly walking over. This should be Master. He thought in his heart and quickly waved his hand, "Let's go and welcome Master." After saying that, he took a step forward and ran towards the sedan chair. When the servant who was carrying the sedan chair saw the housekeeper coming, he quickly quickened his steps and stopped at the entrance of the residence. Du Ziding quickly went forward and stood in front of the sedan chair and bowed, "Master." The servant lowered the sedan chair and a figure slowly walked out. Du Ziding smiled and stood up, "Master." Halfway through his words, he seemed to be choked and his face turned ugly. Because he realized that the person who came back was not Master but Miss Zhang Yuyao. Didn't he ask these fellows to invite Master? Why did these fellows invite Miss Zhang? Of course, it wasn't that he was prejudiced against Zhang Yuyao. But this time, Madame Xie must be met by Master as the head of the household. Moreover, Master seemed to value this dried flower very much and asked him to pay special attention to it. Now that he invited Miss Zhang, could she make the decision? Taking a step back, even if Miss Zhang could make the decision, if something went wrong and Master came back, wouldn't he be blamed? Although this was what he thought, he couldn't say it out loud. Thus, he said, "Hello Miss Zhang, is Master back yet?" While speaking, he intentionally or unintentionally glanced at the sedan chair behind. He thought, the sedan chair in front is Miss Zhang, so the one behind should be Master, right? After all, Master was so concerned about this dried flower, he should be back. But the next moment he was disappointed, because the person who came down was Jingshu. This, Master didn't come back? Why did these two ladies come back? Just as he was puzzled, Zhang Yuyao spoke, "Housekeeper Du, this time Master didn't come back, so we sisters specially came back to meet Madame Xie." Du Ziding didn't reply because he didn't know how to reply. He couldn't possibly say that this was a big matter and that his master had to make the decision, right? Wouldn't that be cutting off his own path of retreat? One had to know that these two young ladies were the old master's future wives, so he didn't dare to provoke them. After all, he still wanted to work in the Zhang mansion for a few more years. Jingshu seemed to see Du Ziding's difficulties and smiled. "Steward Du, this time Prince Zhang has something important to do, so we came back to solve the problem. You don't have to worry, we will tell Prince Zhang if there is anything." What he meant was that it was Prince Zhang who asked us to come back. Of course, she said this because she didn't want the people in the Zhang mansion to know that Prince Zhang was missing. Although she knew that Prince Zhang wasn't in danger, others didn't know. If the people in the Zhang mansion knew that the old master was not around, it would cause a huge uproar. For the peace of the Zhang mansion, it was a last resort to temporarily hide it from everyone. Obviously, Zhang Yuyao also understood Jingshu's meaning and interrupted, "Yes, Steward Du, we will talk to Prince Zhang. Don't worry." Du Ziding lowered his head and frowned. He could understand what the two young ladies meant. It was nothing more than letting them take charge of the overall situation, which was not impossible. After all, these two young ladies were the old master's future wives. Moreover, since the old master was not back, they could only let these two young ladies take charge. Thinking, he said, "What are you two talking about? Since the old master is not back, naturally you two will take charge of the overall situation. Let's go in first." After that, he turned around and made a gesture with a smile, "Two young ladies, this way please." Zhang Yuyao and Jingshu looked at each other and smiled. They walked into the mansion one after another, while Du Ziding led a group of servants behind them. They were silent all the way until they reached the front yard. Zhang Yuyao pointed at the cotton-padded clothes in front of them and asked, Steward Du, how is the production and sales of cotton-padded clothes now? Du Ziting hurried forward and stood still with a touch of pride in his eyes. Now the production of cotton-padded clothes has doubled compared to before, and the sales are in short supply. The whole Chang and city is fighting for our cotton-padded clothes. Since the old master left, he had been supporting the family alone. Coupled with the miscellaneous matters in the mansion and the cotton-padded clothes, it could be said that he was exhausted and had not slept well for several nights. Of course, he was not tired of these things and thought that working for the old master was not tiring at all. The two young ladies were well aware of all these. Looking at Steward Du's panda eyes, they naturally understood. Therefore, Zhang Yuyao said with concern, Steward Du, you have been working hard recently. When Prince Zhang comes back, he will definitely reward you. It's not hard, it's not hard. Du Ziting waved his hand and smiled. How can it be hard to work for the old master? There are not many kind-hearted and charitable people like the old master. It is my blessing to work in the Zhang mansion. Chapter 1895. The two girls smiled and nodded. They understood Du Ziting's loyalty and did not say anything else. However, a pile of dried flowers in the corner attracted their attention. Jing Shu glanced at the dried flowers, then looked at Du Ziting. Housekeeper Du, are these dried flowers sent by Madame Xie? Du Ziting nodded and glanced at the main hall. Last time, Madame Xie sent some dried flowers. Master treasured them and reached an agreement with Madame Xie. This time, she sent some again. Jing Shu looked at Zhang Yuyao and nodded. They were now certain that this Madame Xie was the one who visited Prince Zhang last time. These dried flowers were used by Prince Zhang to make perfume. Since she was already here, they naturally had to meet her. Thus, she looked at Du Ziting. Housekeeper Du, prepare the tea. We will go and meet Madame Xie. Du Ziting nodded slightly and waved her hand to signal the servants to prepare. She then said, This way, Madame Xie is in the main hall. The two girls nodded, brushed their sleeves, and walked to the main hall. Passing through the corridor, a group of servants playing with cotton appeared in front of the two girls. However, they were not in the mood to care about this. They walked straight to the main hall. As soon as they entered the main hall, they saw a woman sitting in the main hall. It was Madame Xie. Madame Xie. The two girls went up to her. Although they only met Madame Xie once or twice, they remembered her clearly. It was not because she was outstanding, but because she was polite and graceful no matter what she did. This was not something an ordinary woman could do. When Madame Xie heard someone calling her, she glanced at the door. Seeing that it was not Zhang Feng, a hint of disappointment flashed in her eyes. However, it disappeared quickly. She then stood up and said, Hello, ladies. She naturally had some influence on the two girls in front of her. Ever since her family declined, she sold flowers for a living and trained a pair of good eyes. Zhang Yuyao stepped forward and smiled. Madame Xie has a good memory. You still remember us? Of course. Madame Xie nodded slightly and smiled. Both of you are beautiful and dignified. You and Prince Zhang are talented and beautiful. How could this old woman not remember you? These words made the two women happy in their hearts. They were Zhang Feng's future wives. This matter was basically known to everyone in Quanan. However, they couldn't help but feel happy after being praised like this. Zhang Yuyao smiled and said, Madam, you're too polite. Come, take a seat. As she spoke, she gestured for him to take a seat. Thank you, ladies. Madame Xie straightened her skirt and sat down. Then, she thought of something and asked, Why don't I see Prince Zhang? This time, she came to see Prince Zhang. At the same time, she also wanted to talk to Prince Zhang about the dried flowers. If she didn't have the right person, how could she continue with this business deal? Jing Shu seemed to have seen through Madame Xie's thoughts. Just as she was about to reply, a servant came over with tea. She smiled and said, Madame Xie, don't be anxious. Have a cup of tea to warm your body. As she spoke, she stroked the rim of Madame Xie's teacup. Your tea is already cold. Let the servant change it to a hot one. The servant was quick-witted. When he heard this, he quickly removed the teacup and served 3 new cups of tea. Jing Shu picked up the teacup and looked at Madame Xie. She smiled and said, Madame Xie, please have some tea. Madame Xia originally wanted to discuss the matter as soon as possible. However, seeing that the two in front of her weren't anxious at all and were polite, she couldn't refuse. She picked up the teacup and took a sip. Thank you, ladies. Zhang Yuyao put down the teacup and smiled at Madame Xia. Madame Xia, how many dried flowers did you bring this time? Madame Xia frowned and didn't answer immediately. This was because she was here to discuss business with Prince Zhang. Why did these two ladies come out? Could it be that Prince Zhang didn't want to do business anymore and wanted these two girls to send her away? However, thinking about it, it was impossible. Even if he wanted to send her away, why would these two girls be so polite to her? After thinking for a while, she still couldn't figure it out. Therefore, she asked in confusion, "Ladies, please forgive this old woman's impoliteness for asking, but why hasn't young Master Zhang come out? Hasn't he always been in charge of this matter?" The two girls looked at each other as if they were sending a message. After a while, Jingshu smiled and said, "Madame Xia, Prince Zhang has something important to deal with at the academy and can't leave the mountain. Thus, this matter was temporarily left to us sisters." "I see." Madame Xia nodded. Now she could understand why Prince Zhang didn't appear. It turned out that he had left this matter to these two ladies. Although it was a little abrupt, Prince Zhang must have his own matters to attend to. Thinking about it, she said, "In that case, let's go out and check the goods. The dried flowers are in the front yard. I'm sure you've seen it." Since someone had already made the decision, finding Prince Zhang didn't matter. As long as they checked the goods and there were no problems, it was fine. Chapter 1896. All right. Jingshu nodded and glanced at Zhang Yuyao. Seeing that the latter had no objections, she said, "Madam, please." The dried flowers were something that Prince Zhang had instructed them to do. Although they did not know much about it, they still had to check the goods. After that, the three of them stood up and walked towards the front yard. In a short while, the three of them arrived. Madame Xia pointed at the pile of dried flowers in front of her and smiled. "Ladies, there are a total of 30 stones here. Please check them." Zhang Yuyao glanced at the dried flowers on the ground. She didn't know much about these things, so she had to find someone familiar. Thus, she glanced at Du Ziting, who was not far away. "Steward Du, come and count these dried flowers. There are a total of 30 stones." Du Ziting nodded and followed the order. Then he brought a few servants to check. After a short while, he had counted everything carefully and replied, "Ladies, it is exactly 30 stones, no more, no less." Jingshu nodded and said, "Since there is no problem, let's check for Madame Xia." After that, she looked at Madame Xia. "Madame Xia, the accountant will settle the bill for you later. Please wait for a while." "No hurry, no hurry." Madame Xia smiled and nodded. Then, she seemed to have thought of something and asked worriedly, "Ladies, do you still want the dried flowers in the future?" She did not want to ask this question. However, it was two ladies who appeared today and not Prince Zhang. This made her a little nervous. If the Zhang mansion did not want the dried flowers the next time, what should she do? Hence, she asked this question out of curiosity. Firstly, she wanted to confirm the attitude of the two ladies. Secondly, she wanted to give herself a peace of mind. However, this question stumped the two ladies. They were here to complete a transaction on behalf of Prince Zhang. How would they know if they still wanted the dried flowers in the future? If they said something wrong, wouldn't they be inhumane? The two ladies looked at each other and did not know what to do. Fortunately, Jingshu calmed down and looked at Madame Xia. She probed, "Madame Xia, didn't Prince Zhang tell you?" "Prince Zhang." Madame Xia blinked her beautiful eyes and smiled. "Prince Zhang did say that as long as he did not say anything, we will continue to send the dried flowers. But now, it's you two ladies." Zhang Feng did say that because the perfume required a large amount of dried flowers. The dried flowers that they were sending were far from enough. They might ask for more in the future. How could they run out of stock? However, she was worried that the two ladies now that they were taking over the dried flowers. That was why he asked this question. Otherwise, who would cut off their own source? The two women obviously didn't know about this. Hearing young Master Zhang's orders, they were naturally overjoyed. Thus, Zhang Yuyao smiled and said, Since young Master Zhang has orders, then let's do as young Master Zhang says. Hearing this, Madame Xie felt relieved. She didn't have to worry about anything anymore. She smiled and said, "Since that's the case, thank you very much. This is what we should do it." Jing Shu and Zhang Yuyao looked at each other and smiled. At the same time, in the palace, the imperial study was surrounded by white fog. It was as if it was in a fairyland. Li Shimin sat on the dragon throne and smoked silently. It was as if he was trying to use cigarettes to send away all his grief and pain. Everything that had happened recently flashed through his mind like a video. Hundreds of officials forced him to abdicate, issued an edict, and held a water and land assembly. Even Guanyin was forced to go to the temple to pray. The worst thing was that even Feng Zi had disappeared. There was no news from him until now. He even doubted if he had the hearts of the people. Thinking about this, he took another puff of the cigarette in an attempt to numb himself. Little Gizi looked at His Majesty and frowned. He had been following His Majesty closely these few days and knew His Majesty's worries. Hundreds of officials forced him to abdicate, issued an edict, and held a water and land assembly. His Majesty had never been willing to do these things. But now he was doing them all. This was all caused by Zhang Feng. He used to have a good impression of Zhang Feng, but after this incident, he had already blacklisted Zhang Feng. It was because this guy often did strange things and caused others to clean up for him. Now, even His Majesty wasn't going to let him off. Although he thought this, he couldn't say it. He knew that Zhang Feng's position in His Majesty's heart was definitely higher than his. However, on second thought, this brat Zhang Feng was also very powerful. Could he fly? If he could become such a person, he would definitely clear all obstacles for His Majesty. Unfortunately, he was a rootless person and couldn't enter the imperial court. Otherwise, thinking of this, he moved his eyes to Li Shimin, only to see Li Shimin lighting another cigarette in his mouth, as if he was going to smoke. This scared the hell out of him. He hurriedly advised, "Your Majesty, you've already smoked 10 cigarettes. Why don't you take a break?" He had been by His Majesty's side all this time. He had seen His Majesty smoke without stopping. Although he knew that cigarettes were divine things that could make people ascend to heaven, it wasn't the same thing to smoke like this. Chapter 1897. However, Li Shimin did not care about this. As if he did not hear Xiao Gizi's words, he took a deep breath and exhaled. "Your Majesty," Xiao Gizi lowered his head, his voice so soft that only he could hear it. He knew His Majesty's temper. As long as he had decided on something, he would not listen to any advice. For example, smoking now. His Majesty liked it and would not throw it away. However, he was thinking of His Majesty and was unwilling to give up persuading him. "Your Majesty, why don't you take a break?" This time, the persuasion seemed to have worked a little. Li Shimin glanced at little Gizi, somewhat sullen. "What's wrong? You want to abdicate too?" As soon as he finished speaking, Xiao Gizi's legs suddenly went soft. He hurriedly crawled on the ground, his face turning green and white. "Your Majesty, this slave does not dare. How could he dare to have such thoughts? Abdicate? This was a capital offense. How could he dare? He only wanted to persuade His Majesty, but he was being accused of something?" However, on second thought, there was a trace of anger in His Majesty's words. It did not seem to be directed at him. After all, he had not done anything out of line recently. Thinking of this, he raised his head to look at His Majesty. Unexpectedly, Li Shimin was also looking at him. Their eyes met. Xiao Gizi instantly quivered and hurriedly lowered his head. "Your Majesty, please spare my life." Although he was begging for mercy, his heart was already in his throat. He was afraid that if something went wrong, his head would be separated from his body. After all, His Majesty was a temperamental person. Li Shimin looked at the trembling Xiao Gizi with mixed feelings. What he had said just now was actually words of anger. Abdicating was a reflection of those ministers. In his heart, he did not know if he was a qualified monarch, but those ministers' way of abdicating made him angry. Although he was angry, he could not do anything because he knew that these fellows did the right thing. When everyone thought that the Black Tortoise sect was in the sky, he had already been pushed to the climax of public opinion. the ministers were also thinking of the people. As for Xiaogizi, he had become a punching bag. This fellow was loyal. If he was told to go left, he would never go right. At the same time, he was also glad that he had such a loyal servant by his side. How could he kill him? Thus, he put away his angry expression and said softly, "Get up, I'm not blaming you." Little Gizi didn't get up immediately. Instead, he looked up and saw that His Majesty had already turned his head away. He didn't hesitate and quickly got up. However, his legs didn't seem to listen to him. They kept shaking and he had to stand up several times before he could stand up. After getting up, he bowed again. "Thank you, Your Majesty, for sparing my life." Before he could finish his sentence, he was interrupted by a hoarse voice at the door of the imperial study. "Your Majesty, there is a letter from Xianxia." Before he could finish, Li Shimin abruptly stood up and glanced at the door. He said excitedly, "Quickly bring it up." He knew that Feng Zi was in Sheng State, and this letter was most likely related to Feng Zi. Not long after, the sound of footsteps came from the door. A strong man walked in with small, quick steps. However, as soon as he came in, he seemed to feel that something was wrong. A pungent smell wafted over, making it hard for him to breathe. Cough, cough. He covered his mouth and coughed nonstop. He felt that tears were about to come out. For a moment, he even wanted to go out and never come in again. However, when he thought that he still had to send a letter to His Majesty, he still made up his mind and walked in. However, something even more strange happened. He couldn't see inside clearly, and he couldn't see His Majesty's figure. Layers of smoke blocked his line of sight. What should he do? He could only muster up his courage and walk in. However, Li Shimin couldn't wait any longer. He glanced at little Gizi beside him and urged, "Quickly go and bring the letter over." Little Gizi was still looking at the door. When he heard that His Majesty wanted him to go, he hurriedly ran towards the door. Speaking of which, his legs were still weak just now, but when he heard that he had to do something for His Majesty, his legs instantly became light. As soon as he walked, he formed a gust of wind. Even the smoke started to swirl. His vision suddenly became clear. At this moment he saw a figure walking over. It was the strong man just now. He immediately berated, "Stop, give me the letter." That strong man didn't hesitate and hurriedly handed the letter to little Gizi. Just as he was about to turn and leave, he heard little Gizi's figure again. "Next time you're so slow, boy, I'll break your legs." His expression changed. He wanted to refute but didn't know how to. He could only secretly feel bitter in his heart. It wasn't that he was slow, but this room was full of smoke. How could he be fast? Thinking of this, he still walked out of the room quickly. Little Gizi received the letter. Without hesitation, he turned around and handed it to Li Shimin. At this time, Li Shimin was already impatient. He opened the letter and read it carefully. "Your Majesty, since leaving Chang, and I have chased after Zhang Feng all the way to Shengzhou. I have not seen any trace of him." When he saw this, his expression changed and he slapped the table. Chapter 1898. This frightened little Gizi. He stumbled and fell to the ground. He quickly knelt down. "Your Majesty, please calm down." However, Li Shimin ignored him. He leaned on the table and stared angrily in the direction of Shengzhou, as if he was thinking about something. He had always regarded Feng Zi as one of the most important people by his side. This time, he had even mobilized troops to search for him. As for Li Jing as the Minister of War, he had never disappointed me. However, this time, this fellow had chased him all the way to Shengzhou and still hadn't seen him. This was ridiculous. I thought so highly of him, but he couldn't even catch one person. What's the use? If Feng Zi is in danger, what should I do? However, on second thought, Yu Qigong had also chased after Feng Zi. There should be news, right? After thinking for a while, he suppressed the anger in his heart and read again. Unexpectedly, I learned that the various Turkic tribes had been attacked by heavenly lightning. There were countless casualties. When he saw this, he suddenly trembled. His eyes suddenly widened. He even rubbed them, suspecting that he had seen wrongly. However, after reading it a few times, it was still the same words. Finally, he could no longer contain the shock in his heart. he kept exclaiming. The various Turkic tribes had been attacked by heavenly lightning? There were countless casualties? How is this possible? Xianxia, who was crawling on the ground, seemed to have noticed something unusual. He quickly raised his head, only to see Li Shimin constantly crying out in alarm. His feet seemed to be somewhat unstable, and he was about to fall down the steps. He was so scared that he quickly got up, strode forward, hugged Li Shimin, and exclaimed, "Your Majesty, be careful." Suddenly being hugged, Li Shimin steadied himself. However, his brain seemed to have suffered a great impact. He was a little dizzy. He shook his head hard and slowly woke up. Then he looked at little Gizi. "I'm fine. Help me sit down." Hearing this, little Gizi finally relaxed. He ignored the cold sweat on his head and quickly and carefully helped Li Shimin to sit on the dragon throne. Seeing that Li Shimin was fine, he said, "Your Majesty, don't be so agitated. Your health is important." Li Shimin didn't answer little Gizi because he was still immersed in shock and couldn't extricate himself. The various Turkic tribes had been attacked by heavenly lightning? Countless casualties? These words were like a brand that was deeply imprinted into his heart. Heavenly thunder? This was something that only the heavens could control, so why would it suddenly attack the Turkic camp? This was completely illogical. Moreover, even if the Turkic camp had been struck by lightning, how could there have been so many casualties? The only possibility was that Li Jing had given a fake military order. However, he quickly rejected this hypothesis. He knew very well what kind of person Li Jing was. He was an upright person with strict discipline. It was absolutely impossible for him to do such a thing. Of course, he didn't dare to do it either. However, all of this was too strange. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was amiss. Li Shimin frowned. Little Gizi seemed to notice that something was wrong and said softly, "Your Majesty, please don't worry about state affairs. What does a castrate like you know?" Li Shimin glanced at little Gizi with some dissatisfaction. This is a huge matter for the Turks. Halfway through his words, he felt that something was wrong and immediately changed his tone. Forget it, forget it. What's the use of saying so much to a eunuch like you?" After that, he read the letter again. This heavenly thunder incident is very strange. I suspect that it has something to do with Zhang Feng. Feng Zi? Li Shimin frowned, somewhat puzzled. Didn't I ask Li Jing to track down Feng Zi's traces? How could the heavenly thunder have anything to do with Feng Zi? Could it be that the heavenly thunder was summoned by Feng Zi? It shouldn't be possible. With doubts in his mind, he continued to read. According to the survivors, a round object appeared in the sky that night, covering the sky and the moon. Then, countless things with sparks were thrown down, causing countless casualties in the Turkic camp. The specific number of casualties is unknown. Li Shimin put down the letter and frowned even more. This description was exactly the same as the thing in Chang'an City. In that case, it was Feng Zi. However, why would this guy go to Xingzhou and blow up the Turkic camp? Could it be premeditated? Whether it was premeditated or not, it was still a good thing for the Tang dynasty. However, now this guy should still be in Xingzhou. Would he be in danger? Thinking of this, Li Shimin was a little uneasy. He glanced at Xianxia and said seriously, "Immediately send someone to Xingzhou to pass on my order. You must let Li Jing find Zhang Feng and bring him back smoothly." After that, he seemed to think of something and added, "In addition, tell Wei Jing, Du Ruhui, Fang Xianling, Zhang Sun Wuji, and others to come to see me." "Yes, Your Majesty." Xianxia bowed and turned to walk out of the door. After instructing everything, Li Shimin sat on the dragon throne again, picked up a cigarette from the desk, put it in his mouth, lit it, and slowly smoked. At this time, he had mixed feelings. On one hand, he was happy about the bombing of the Turkic camp, but on the other hand, he was worried about Zhang Feng's safety. The Turkic people had always been a thorn in the heart of the Tang dynasty. Almost every year, they would come to the Tang dynasty to burn, kill, and loot. The people of the Tang dynasty hated them to the bone, but they could do nothing because they lived in the grassland and could not be killed. Chapter 1899. However, the blow this time was undoubtedly huge to the Turkic headquarters. Although it was impossible to know whether Xieli and Tuli were dead or alive, it could definitely stop the other party from going south. And Zhang Feng had really made a great contribution this time. However, he had been missing, which made him very vexed. Just as he was feeling vexed, footsteps came from outside the door. Then little Gizi walked in and bowed. "Your Majesty, the verbal order has been sent. Duke Wei and the others are also waiting outside. Should we summon them?" "Summon them." Li Shimin waved his hand. Little Gizi accepted the order and turned to leave the room. After a while, he walked in with Wei Zheng. Wei Zheng and the others followed little Gizi's footsteps into the imperial study and smelled a pungent smell of smoke. Although they usually smoked a little, it was only when they had nothing to do. In addition, they were generally old. How could they smell such a strong smell? They immediately coughed. Cough, cough, cough. This smell, everyone covered their noses and coughed. Seeing this, little Gizi hurriedly comforted them. "Sirs, please bear with it. His Majesty is waiting." Hearing this, everyone did not complain anymore. After all, His Majesty had already issued an edict and admitted his mistake. Strictly speaking, he was a good emperor. Besides, the thing in the sky was not the vengeful spirit of the Xuanwu Gate. After thinking about it, everyone still walked toward the main hall. They saw Li Shimin sitting on the dragon throne. Everyone came forward and bowed together. "Your Majesty." Li Shimin was already impatient. He waved his hand casually. "Rise. Everyone sit." After he finished speaking, he handed the letter on the table to Xiao Gizi and said, "Pass the letter to the officials." "Letter?" Everyone looked at the letter in Li Shimin's hand in confusion and guessed. Could it be that there was something wrong with that place? Or did something happen at the border? With doubts, they looked at Li Shimin but could not see any joy, anger, sorrow, or joy. At this moment, Xiao Gizi handed the letter to Wei Zheng. Because Wei Zheng was the closest person to Li Shimin, it was convenient for him to pass it down. Wei Zheng took the letter and looked down. Two big words appeared in front of his eyes. Li Jing. Wasn't Li Jing sent by His Majesty to find Feng Zi? Could there be news of Feng Zi? Delighted, he immediately tore open the letter and read it. The officials sitting around felt as if their hearts were being scratched by a cat, itching unbearably. They also wanted to read the letter because they knew that the letter that His Majesty allowed everyone to read was definitely a matter of national importance. As the backbone of the imperial court, they all wanted to read it in advance. However, this little Gizi had already given the letter to Wei Zheng. They couldn't possibly snatch it away, right? Therefore, everyone looked at Wei Zheng curiously, trying to get some information. At first, Wei Zheng's expression was normal and even had a hint of a smile. However, slowly, his eyes widened and his mouth opened wide as if he had seen something unbelievable. In the end, he stood up abruptly and kept exclaiming that it was impossible. Seeing this, everyone knew that the matter was definitely not simple. They quickly went forward and snatched the letter from Wei Zheng's hand and gathered to read it. However, halfway through, everyone's eyes widened and they kept exclaiming, "What? The Turks were attacked by lightning? And it was Feng Zi who did it? Countless Turks died? Xieli led the troops back to the grassland? How is this possible?" They felt that their worldview had been turned upside down and they kept exclaiming. Lightning was a divine object that only the heavens could control. How could it be related to Feng Zi? Moreover, according to Li Jing's letter, it seemed that Feng Zi had sent down lightning from the sky and caused the deaths of various Turks. If that was the case, it was even more unbelievable. How could a human control lightning? Could it be that Feng Zi was an immortal? Only immortals had such means. However, they quickly denied this theory. Because the people present had more or less interacted with Feng Zi, they could be considered to know his character. This kid usually liked to fiddle with strange things. In terms of talent, he was a little talented, but it was impossible for him to have such means. Therefore, everyone looked at Li Shimin, hoping to get some information from His Majesty. Li Shimin naturally knew the doubts in everyone's hearts. He smiled faintly and said, "Have you all read the letter just now?" After that, he continued, Li Jing said in the letter that the lightning this time was very likely to be Feng Zi's doing. At first, I was also puzzled as to why there would be such a ridiculous statement. However, after I thought of the Xuanwu Gate incident in Chang, and I felt that everything was logical. The Xuanwu Gate incident in Chang? Everyone was puzzled and confused. What was the connection between these two things? One was what happened in Chang, and the other was what happened in Xingzhou. The two had nothing to do with each other. Perhaps he saw through everyone's thoughts, Li Shimin continued. Have you forgotten that these things have something in common? That is, they can all go to the sky, and they were all done by Fengzi? Chapter 1900. As soon as he said that, everyone exclaimed in unison. They looked at each other as if they had understood something, but at the same time, they seemed to be missing something. Wei Zheng was quick-witted. He stepped forward, bowed, and said, Your Majesty, are you saying that Fengzi's original intention was to blow up the Turkic camp in Xingzhou, and he was just passing by Chang'an? As soon as he said that, everyone suddenly understood. So that was the case. Fengzi's goal was the Turkic camp, and Chang'an was just passing by. In that case, the Xuanwu Gate incident was really a farce? They even forced His Majesty to issue an edict? They really shouldn't have done that. Thinking of this, everyone couldn't help blushing. However, Li Shimin didn't seem to care about this. He glanced at everyone and said seriously, Yes, from Li Jing's letter, Fengzi's goal was indeed the Turkic camp. In this case, Chang'an was just a farce. It's not worth mentioning. As soon as he said that, everyone felt even more ashamed. They blushed and didn't even dare to raise their heads. Because of the farce in Chang'an, they had forced the emperor to abdicate. This was really inappropriate for a subject. Of course, this was based on the fact that the emperor didn't make any mistakes. Li Shimin was such an emperor. Except for the incident at the Xuanwu Gate, he basically didn't make any serious mistakes. He was conscientious in politics and treated the people like his own children. However, finally, someone couldn't help it. Zhang Sun Wuji stepped forward, lowered his head and said softly, Your Majesty, I committed a heinous crime a few days ago. Your Majesty, please punish me. With the first person, there was naturally a second person. Soon, all the officials stepped forward one by one. Your Majesty, I know that I have committed a heinous crime. Please punish me. Your Majesty, I know that I have committed a heinous crime. Please punish me. Your Majesty, I know that I have committed a heinous crime. Please punish me. They bowed together, lowered their heads, and blushed. Li Shimin looked at them meaningfully. In fact, he was still a little angry. Just a few days ago, he even wanted to punish these old fellows for their crimes. However, when he thought of everyone's contributions to the Tang dynasty, he silently endured it. Take Wei Zheng for example. Although this guy had a bad temper, he was indeed a pillar of the country. He was upright and plain-spoken, and as an official, his sleeves were clean. There's also Zhang Sun Wuji. He's been with me since before I became a cavalry. Although he's not as good at strategy as Fang Xianling, and he's not as good as Wei Zheng, he's still my brother-in-law. How could such a person be punished? Moreover, they had all admitted their mistakes today, so it was even more impossible to punish them. Thus, he revealed a trace of a smile and waved his hand. Everyone rise. This emperor has never taken it to heart. Everyone looked at each other in disbelief. Since when did His Majesty become so generous? It wasn't like this in the past. However, thinking about it was just thinking. Naturally, he couldn't say it out loud. However, they couldn't help but feel a little guilty and a little worried. They were worried that His Majesty still hadn't vented his anger. Therefore, Zhang Sun Wuji looked up and saw that His Majesty wasn't angry, so he said, Your Majesty, since it's not the ghosts of the Xuanwu Gate, why don't we withdraw the edict and the Water and Land Assembly? He had his reasons for saying so. The edict was an edict issued to state the sins of the current emperor. It was bound to be recorded in history. If it was passed down, it would definitely cause damage to Li Shimin's reputation. At that time, if future generations scolded Li Shimin, they might implicate Zhang Sun Wugo. As his brother-in-law, he didn't want that to happen. Of course, Li Shimin also had the same idea. However, he was the emperor of a country. How could he withdraw the edict so easily? Moreover, the water and land assembly and the heaven-worshipping ceremony were almost ready. If he withdrew them, where would his prestige be in the future? After thinking about it, it was better not to withdraw them. Therefore he said, "Forget it. The edict has already been issued. Moreover, the water and land assembly and the heaven-worshipping ceremony have already been put on the agenda. How can we withdraw them? Where would my prestige be in the future?" But Zhang Sun Wuji was obviously unwilling to give up. He wanted to continue persuading, but he was interrupted by Li Shimin halfway. "No buts." Li Shimin waved his hand to stop Zhang Sun Wuji. Then he scanned the crowd and said seriously, "This time, I called you all here to discuss the matters of Xing State. Would you all like to express your views on the current situation of Xing State?" Everyone looked at each other and didn't immediately answer. Instead, they all began to think in their hearts. Xing State could be said to have won a great battle. Although the Turks didn't take the initiative to attack, they dealt a heavy blow. There shouldn't be any danger. However, His Majesty didn't seem very happy. Everyone was a little cautious, afraid that they would make His Majesty unhappy, so they didn't step forward to answer. The imperial study slowly fell into silence. Finally, after 15 minutes, Wei Jing stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, the Turkic tribes were struck by lightning and suffered countless casualties. In the next few years, they probably won't go south to pillage. Our dynasty should strengthen the defense of the border and even train the soldiers to strengthen our own defenses." Chapter 1901. Li Shimin nodded his head and praised. Wei Qing's words hit the nail on the head. "What you said is correct. This time the Tujue have suffered heavy casualties. It should be the best time to exterminate them. But right now the Battle of Chiotsi City is still ongoing. We cannot spare too many troops and horses for the time being. Otherwise, Zhen would personally lead the troops to exterminate these animals." "Your Majesty, there's no need to be so angry." Zhang Sun Wuji bowed and said solemnly, "The Turks are like grasshoppers after autumn. They won't be able to jump around for a few days. The current casualties are enough to make them suffer." Everyone nodded and felt that Zhang Sun Wuji's words made sense. Li Shimin also felt the same. He smiled faintly and said, "You're right. This matter can't be rushed." After saying that, he changed the topic and said with a frown, "However, we haven't found any traces of Feng Zi. I don't know how he is." As soon as he said that, everyone frowned. Zhang Feng and the others were very familiar with him. In the past, they often drank and chatted together. If there was something they didn't know, they would ask this kid for advice. Now that he suddenly disappeared, they were not used to it. Especially Du Ruhui and Zhang Sun Wuji, they knew that their son and Feng Zi hung out all day. Moreover, when they found out that their son was missing, they felt as if they had lost their souls. They sent people to look for him every day and finally found out that these guys went with Feng Zi. This caused the two of them to be extremely anxious. If something were to happen to their son, what would they do? Thinking of this, they felt as if their hearts were blocked, and they felt very uncomfortable. Li Shimin seemed to have seen through their thoughts and comforted them. "Minister Zheng's, Minister Du, don't be sad. Your son will definitely return safely." The two wiped the corners of their eyes and said in unison, "Thank you, Your Majesty, for your kind words." As soon as they said that, there was a rush of footsteps outside the door. Then a strong man walked in and quickly walked in front of Li Shimin. He bowed and said, "Your Majesty, the Emperor invites you." "The Emperor?" Li Shimin was stunned. "Father usually doesn't see me if there's nothing important. Could it be that something happened this time?" With doubts, he glanced at the strong man and asked, "Why does the Emperor want to see me?" "I don't know." The strong man shook his head, then glanced at the officials present and added, "However, the Emperor said that if the officials want to go, it's fine." Li Shimin frowned and had a bad premonition. Usually, even if the Emperor wants to see me, he will never bring the officials. Because he has long ago stopped caring for the Emperor, why does he want to see the officials today? Moreover, these words were very metaphorical. If the officials wanted to go, it was also possible. That means the Emperor knows the officials to be Li is? To the Emperor, the Emperor's the Emperor to go Z to make it. By right, The previous emperor had already abdicated and no longer cared about politics. B's S's twos except twos. To go. Ts with doubts in their minds, everyone looked at Li Shimin. But at this moment, Li Shimin also looked over. He said with a solemn face, "Since it's the emperor's request, then everyone should go and take a look. Maybe the emperor has something important to say." Everyone naturally didn't dare to refuse and agreed. Thus, Li Shimin led everyone to Li Yuan's residence. In less than a moment, the group arrived. Li Shimin was the first to be led into the main hall by Li Shi. Just as he entered the door, he saw Li Yuan sitting on a chair, drinking alone to drown his sorrows. He did not seem to be too happy. He hurriedly stepped forward and bowed, "Greetings, Imperial Father." Li Yuan raised his sleepy eyes and glanced at Li Shimin, waving his hand, "Get up, Erlang." Then, he seemed to feel something was wrong and asked, "Erlang, the officials didn't come?" "They came, but they're waiting outside." Li Shimin smiled, then looked outside and said to the strong man, "Let them in." As soon as his voice fell, everyone walked in and bowed in unison, "Greetings, Your Majesty." "No need to be polite, sit." Li Yuan glanced at everyone, then looked at Li Shimin and pointed to a chair beside him, "Erlang, sit." Everyone didn't stand on ceremony and took their seats. However, they seemed a little reserved because they didn't come to this place many times, so they were naturally not used to it. Seeing that everyone had taken their seats, Li Yuan opened his mouth, "Erlang, I heard that there's a letter from Qing State?" The emperor's palace was very big, but the news was very fast. This kind of news from outside the palace, those in power were often the first to know. Although he didn't have any real power now, he still had his trusted aides, so this wasn't a big deal. Obviously, Li Shimin also knew a little, but he didn't expect Father Emperor to care about Qing State. This was the border. Logically speaking, only the emperor could ask about it. What did Father Emperor mean now? Perhaps seeing Li Shimin's slightly changed expression, Li Yuan hurriedly changed his words, "Erlang, don't misunderstand, I just want to know about Feng Zi's news. After all, that kid isn't bad, I don't want him to die." Chapter 1902. Hearing this, Li Shimin finally understood. It turned out that his father wanted to inquire about Feng Zi, so he didn't care too much. Thus, he said, "Father, there is indeed a letter from Xianxia, but halfway through he sighed and seemed a little annoyed. It's just that Feng Zi hasn't been brought back yet." "What?" Li Yuan exclaimed and threw the wine cup in his hand. He glanced at the officials and said angrily, "There are so many people in the imperial court, but they can't even bring Feng Zi back?" He couldn't believe it. Even if Feng Zi could go up to heaven, he should have come down, right? It had been almost 3 days, and there was still no news at all? How could this not make him angry? If Feng Zi didn't come back, who would research new things for him in the future? Who would play with him? Thinking of this, he couldn't restrain his anger and glared at the officials. The officials seemed to be afraid of being glared at. They all shrank their heads and didn't dare to speak. Because they didn't know how to speak. Looking for people wasn't something they should do. Moreover, His Majesty had already handed this matter to someone else. Why was he blaming them now? Now they finally understood why he called them here. It was to vent his anger. However, even if they knew, they didn't dare to say anything. After all, he was the emperor. However, Li Shimin couldn't stand it anymore. As the emperor, how could he watch his officials be scolded? So, he quickly said, "Father, don't blame them. After all, they are just civil officials and don't know about these things." After that, he changed the topic and continued, "Although we didn't bring Feng Zi back this time, there is some news about Feng Zi." "News? What news?" Li Yuan turned his head and was instantly interested. "Father, don't be anxious." Li Shimin smiled faintly and then looked at Zhang Sun Wuji, who was in a daze, and said, "Minister Zhang, you say it." Zhang Sun Wuji was still in a daze, but when he heard this, he immediately became energetic. However, he knew that this wasn't a good task. If he didn't say it well, he would definitely be scolded, but he couldn't refuse. He could only step forward and said, "Emperor, just now, Xianxia sent a letter saying that the Turkic camp was attacked by lightning." "What? The Turkic camp was struck by lightning?" Li Yuan opened his eyes wide, a look of disbelief on his face. However, looking at Zhang Sun Wuji's expression, It didn't seem like he was lying. Then he looked at Li Shimin. Li Shimin's face was even more sincere, as if he was telling the truth. This made him a little less confident. Heavenly thunder? Where did the heavenly lightning come from? And attack the Turkic camp? Isn't this a little strange? With doubts in his mind, he looked at Zhang Sun Wuji and said coldly, "Speak clearly. What heavenly lightning? What was going on? Is it related to Fengzi again?" How could Zhang Sun Wuji withstand the shock? He hurriedly replied, "Zhang Feng was the one who did the heavenly lightning. He used the heavenly lightning to blast the Turkic camp." Fengzi did it? Li Yuan frowned. The more he listened, the more confused he felt. What was this? If Fengzi could control the heavenly lightning, wouldn't he be an immortal? Now, he increasingly felt that Zhang Sun Wuji was dishonest. "Do you see that I'm old and deliberately deceive me? I don't dare." Zhang Sun Wuji hurriedly cupped his hands. Cold sweat had already appeared on his forehead. Although the emperor didn't have real power, his prestige was still there. How could he dare? Therefore, he hurriedly said, "Your Majesty, do you remember the incident of the Black Tortoise Gate in Chang, and last time? That was Fengzi. At first, we always felt that there was a problem. Later, we found out that Fengzi was going to Xingzhou to blast the Turkic camp." Oh, a trace of surprise flashed in Li Yuan's eyes. He was very clear about the incident of the Black Tortoise Gate in Chang. At first, he blamed Erlang blindly. Later, he thought that since the incident had passed, he didn't care anymore. Moreover, he had promised to preside over the worship ceremony. However, he didn't expect that there would be such a thing. It seemed that Fengzi was really not simple. He drifted all the way from Chang and to Xingzhou just to blast the Turkic camp. However, Fengzi had blasted the Turkic camp. Would the Turkic people let him go? Wasn't this kid sending a sheep to the tiger's mouth? The more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. He hurriedly looked at Zhang Sun Wuji and hurriedly asked, "How is Fengzi now? Is he dead or alive?" Zhang Sun Wuji lowered his head tightly. For a moment, he didn't know how to answer. Because he didn't know. Li Jing's letter only mentioned the Turkic and Xingzhou. There was no news of Fengzi at all. Or rather, he hadn't been found yet. How could he answer this? Although he had his own difficulties, Li Yuan didn't care. He hurriedly asked, "How is Fengzi?" He still didn't get a reply. Therefore, he turned to Li Shimin and hurriedly said, "Erling, tell me, what happened to Fengzi?" Li Shimin paused. He didn't want to answer at first. However, when he saw his father's worried expression, he said patiently, "Father, there is no news of Fengzi for the time being. Do you know where he is?" What? Li Yuan suddenly stood up. He glanced at everyone and said angrily, "Xingzhou is such a big place. You can't even find a person?" Chapter 1903. Li Shimin could understand Li Yuan's feelings. He was also anxious about Fengzi's disappearance, but what was the use of being anxious? Right now, Li Jing had already gone to Xingzhou, and Yu Qigong and the others had also rushed over. They were all trying their best to search for him, so it was not the fault of the officials that they could not find him. Thinking about it, he hurriedly advised, "Father, I have already sent people to Xingzhou to handle this matter, but there are not enough people. However, I believe that the results will be out soon." Li Yuan glanced at Li Shimin, but at this moment he was furious, because he knew that Erlang had already done his best. Thus, he looked at the officials, his eyes somewhat gloomy. "Since there are not enough people, then let the clan send out some people." As soon as these words were spoken, the entire hall was in an uproar. Li Shimin looked at Li Yuan with a bewildered expression. Although he really wanted to touch the clan, he knew in his heart that the clan had a deep foundation and could not be eradicated overnight. Therefore, he had always buried this thought in his heart and had never said it out loud. But today, his father had personally said it out loud. Although it was said very tactfully, but he could still hear his father's hatred for the clan. On this point, Imperial Father and I happen to agree. However, could the officials agree? Thinking about it, he shifted his gaze to the officials. In fact, the officials were no longer calm, because many of them were also in the ranks of the clans. The emperor's words just now meant that he was prepared to let the clans search for Zhang Feng. Although they were also worried about Zhang Feng, They did not plan to use the people of their clans. If they touched the people of the clan, it would definitely cause damage to the clan. Thus, everyone hurriedly stepped forward. "Your Majesty, please show mercy. The clan cannot be touched." Li Yuan glanced at the crowd, his face could not help but flush red, the veins on his forehead bulged, and he roared, "Not using the clan? Then who can I count on?" As he spoke, he walked in front of everyone, stretched out his finger, and pointed angrily. "It's you? Or is it still you?" Everyone's faces were filled with astonishment as they retreated. They knew that the emperor was currently in a state of anger and could not be provoked. Li Yuan glanced at everyone and roared again. "Since you can't find Feng Zi, then what's the harm in touching the clan?" After saying that, he looked at the door and shouted, "Pass down my decree. Let all the clans send people to find Feng Zi immediately. If they can't do it, don't come back." But at this moment, a voice came from behind. "Wait." Li Yuan turned his head abruptly and saw that the one who spoke was his son, Li Shimin. Li Shimin actually wanted to get rid of the clan as well, but he knew that getting rid of the clan was not something that could be done overnight. Using his father's method was even more impossible, so he stopped him. At this moment, facing his father's bewildered gaze, he could only step forward and comfort him. "Father, this matter cannot be rushed. Li Jing, Yu Qigong, and the others have already sent people to search for Feng Zi. I believe there will be a result very soon. Moreover, if we let the people of the clan move out now, they will definitely be unwilling, and at that time, it will inevitably cause some twists and turns." Hearing this, Li Yuan was somewhat moved, but he couldn't help being somewhat worried in his heart. Thus he said, "Then what about Feng Zi's safety?" "Father, there's no need to be like this." Li Shimin smiled faintly, trying to ease the awkward situation. "With Li Jing, Yu Qigong, and the others, I believe Feng Zi will not be in danger." Of course, he was not confident about all of this. Right now, he only wanted to appease his father. Li Yuan naturally did not know about this, and thought that Erlang really had a way, so he said, "Since that's the case, then listen to Erlang. I won't participate." In fact, ever since he abdicated, he had basically not participated in political affairs. If it wasn't for Feng Zi, he wouldn't have summoned the ministers at all. Li Shimin seemed to have put down a huge stone in his heart. He let out a long breath and smiled. "Thank you for your understanding, father." After he finished speaking, he swept his gaze across the crowd of officials. "Since there's nothing else, all of you may leave." Everyone looked at each other and did not leave immediately. It was as if they had something to say. A moment later, Zhang Sun Wuji stepped forward and bowed. "Reporting to your Majesty, Emperor, the heaven worship ceremony and the water and land assembly will be held in a few days. When the time comes," speaking to here, he raised his head and glanced at Li Shimin and Li Yuan. However, he did not continue speaking because the heaven worship ceremony and the water and land assembly were originally ordered to be held by His Majesty. Now that it was a farce, whether or not to hold it would depend on His Majesty. Moreover, the Emperor had originally agreed to attend the heaven worship ceremony, and His Majesty had also agreed to attend the water and land assembly. Now that the ceremony and assembly were almost ready, they had to confirm whether or not to attend. Li Shimin naturally knew what everyone was thinking. He did not plan to cancel the heaven worship ceremony and the water and land assembly. In fact, he was prepared to attend. Of course, all of this was built on the basis that he was the emperor. There was also a portion that came from personal feelings. After all, he was brothers with Jianqing and the others. They were already dead. Holding a few ceremonies was something that should be done. It was just that he didn't know what father was thinking. With doubtful thoughts, he looked towards Li Yuan. Chapter 1904. Li Yuan furrowed his brows tightly, as if recalling some kind of sad matter. He picked up the wine cup on the table and gulped it down. Looking at everyone, he said, "Since the preparations are almost complete, then let's hold it as scheduled. Don't worry, I will definitely preside over it." This heaven worship ceremony and water and land assembly was to send his 2 sons to the afterlife. Even if no one asked, he would still participate. Li Shimin seemed to be able to feel Li Yuan's feelings. He nodded emotionally. "That's right, I will also participate at that time. Everyone, if there is nothing else, you may leave." When his voice fell, the officials finally put down the boulder in their hearts. They all cupped their hands and left. Only Li Shimin and Li Yuan remained in the palace. Li Yuan picked up the wine cup and took a sip. Then, he looked at Li Shimin and said softly, "Erlang, I'll have to trouble you for this water and land assembly." "Father Emperor, what are you saying?" Li Shimin lowered his head. He was a bit ashamed. His two brothers died because of him. This matter was naturally nothing. "This is what I should do." Li Yuan nodded and did not say anything, because he could also see that Erlang was a bit sad in his heart. He picked up the wine cup and personally poured a cup of wine. He handed it to Li Shimin. "Come, drink with me." Just as his voice fell, there was a rush of footsteps outside the door. Immediately after, a strong man walked in. Li Shimin remembered this strong man. He was the eunuch of the imperial study. But why was he in such a hurry to come to the emperor's palace? Could it be that something had happened? Even if there was something important, he could not be in such a hurry. What if he disturbed the emperor? Thus, he pretended to be angry and said, "You eunuch, why are you in such a hurry? What if you disturb the emperor?" He said this mainly to give Li Yuan a good impression. After all, they were father and son. He had to show a considerate appearance. Secondly, it was a hint to this eunuch. If it wasn't something important, then don't say it and go back to the imperial study. And this strong man thought that His Majesty was angry. His legs immediately went soft and he prostrated on the ground. "Your Majesty, please spare my life." Li Yuan did not seem to care about all of this. Instead, he looked at Li Shimin and waved his hand indifferently. "Since there's something important, you can go back and talk about it." When Li Shimin heard this, he couldn't do it. If he went back, wouldn't it mean that he was going behind his father's back? Thus, he looked at the strong man and said, "If you have something to say, say it quickly." The strong man was quick-witted. Seeing that His Majesty had spoken, he hurriedly said, "Just now, Lu Guogong sent a letter. His Majesty, please read it." After that, he quickly took out a letter from his sleeve and handed it to Li Shimin. Li Shimin took the letter and hurriedly opened it because he knew that Qing Yaojin was also looking for Feng Zi. Now that the letter was sent, there must be some clues. Sure enough, as soon as he opened it, lines of clues about Zhang Feng appeared in front of him. "Your Majesty, I was looking for Zhang Feng's traces. When I reached Shenzhou, I lost the clues, but later I found some traces. At present, I know that Zhang Feng is floating towards the grassland." Seeing this, Li Shimin frowned. Feng Zi is floating towards the grassland? The grassland is the Turks' residence. Now that the Tang dynasty and the Turks are in a war, isn't going to die? What is this Feng Zi thinking? Li Yuan seemed to see Li Shimin's worry and asked curiously, "Erlang, what happened?" Li Shimin did not answer, but handed the letter to Li Yuan. Li Yuan was puzzled, but he still took the letter and read it carefully. However, after reading half of it, he was not good. Feng Zi is going to the grassland? What's going on? Why does he want to go to the grassland? Doesn't he know that the Tang dynasty and the Turks are like fire and water? Isn't going to die now? He felt bad. After thinking for a long time, he still could not understand why Feng Zi wants to go to the grassland. Therefore, he looked at Li Shimin nervously and asked, "Erlang, why do you think Feng Zi wants to go to the grassland? Isn't this going to die?" Li Shimin naturally did not know, but facing his father's question, it was not good to not answer, so he could only frown and say, "I don't know, maybe Feng Zi is unwilling to let Xieli go?" He himself did not believe what he said. Could it be that those people wanted to attack the grassland? It was impossible. However, he really could not think of any other reason in his heart. Li Yuan was not stupid. Naturally, he would not believe this nonsensical answer. Shooting a glance at Li Shimin, he stood up and paced in the hall. After a long while, he finally stopped and looked at Li Shimin with a solemn expression. "Erlang, I think there must be something fishy about this. You immediately write a letter and order people to speed up and track Feng Zi. Otherwise, once we reach the grassland, it will be difficult for the King of Hell to save us." Li Shimin nodded. He also understood the seriousness of this. Although he still did not know why Feng Zi wants to go to the grassland, he must stop him. Otherwise, if something happens, there will be no chance to regret it. Therefore, he waved his hand to signal Xiao Gizi beside him to prepare a pen and paper. Soon he wrote 2 letters. One was for Qing Yaojin, and the other was for Li Jing. Now that the 2 were not together, the letters must be written separately. Chapter 1905. After he finished writing, he glanced outside the door and waved his hand. Someone quickly send this letter to Xingzhou. Just as he finished speaking, a strong man walked in and took away the letters. Seeing this, Li Yuan's frown slowly relaxed. He looked at Li Shimin and asked worriedly, Erlang, do you think Li Jing, Qing Yaojin and the others can successfully bring Fengzi back? Why do I feel uneasy? Don't worry, father. Li Shimin narrowed his eyes and didn't look too good. However, when he thought of his father beside him, he tried his best to put on a smile. You know the abilities of Li Jing, Qing Yaojin, and Yu Qigong. It shouldn't be a problem to bring Fengzi back. Li Yuan nodded. The 3 of them were indeed fierce generals. Each of them could guard an area. It shouldn't be a problem. He thought too much. After some thought, he said, Erlang is right. It shouldn't be a problem. After he finished speaking, he picked up the wine cup again. However, his slightly trembling right hand betrayed his nervousness. At the same time, White Deer College. A man in plain clothes shuttled through the mountain roads. He looked nervous and looked around from time to time, as if he couldn't wait. When he saw the words, White Deer College, he seemed to be energized and his steps became lighter. In a short while, he reached the entrance of the college. Just as he was about to enter, he was stopped by a shout. Stop, who are you? Why are you trespassing into the college? The one who spoke was Wen Xian. This time, it was his turn to guard the gate. However, he didn't expect someone to trespass into the college without saying a word. Naturally, he had to stop him. When the man heard someone speak, he looked over and saw a man in the corner. He cupped his hands and walked forward. Greetings, senior. I am Bai Ping, a distant relative of Mr. Bosher. I'm here to look for Mr. Bosher. Looking for Mr. Bosher? Wen Xian frowned and circled Bai Ping. What proof do you have? Yu Shernan was too famous, and many people came to look for him every day. Therefore, he needed a certificate to prove the identity of the visitor. Otherwise, he would not be able to receive so many visitors every day. When Bai Ping heard that Wen Xian wanted proof, he didn't hesitate. He quickly took out a jade pendant and handed it to Wen Xian. This is the proof. Wen Xian glanced at the jade pendant and saw a large Yu character engraved on it. Presumably, this was given by Mr. Bosher, so he didn't suspect anything. He waved his hand and said, Go in. Thank you, senior. Bai Ping cupped his hands in salute. Then, he turned around and slipped into the academy. He had important news to report. He did not dare to waste any time. As soon as he entered, he heard the sound of people reading. He didn't know why, but the sound of reading seemed to have some kind of attraction, pulling him forward. He quickly walked to the door of the classroom and glanced into the classroom. He saw Yu Shernan teaching on the podium. Yu Shernan seemed to have felt the gaze on him. He glanced into the classroom. With just one glance, his expression changed. He casually said a few words in the classroom, then turned and walked out. He looked at Bai Ping nervously and asked, Why are you here? Did something happen in the palace? That's right, Bai Ping was a trusted aide he had arranged in the palace. Usually, if there was any important news in the palace, he would be sent out. Moreover, as a large family, the Yu clan had to do these things. If the emperor were to make a move against the clan one day, they would be prepared. Also, he had once held a position in the palace, and many people were his disciples and grand-disciples. Needless to say, the news would spread to his ears. Most importantly, he had arranged for people to stay in the palace for Fengzi's disappearance. As long as Li Erlang received the news, he would immediately send it to White Deer College. Bai Ping was one of them. Facing Yu Shernan's question, Bai Ping did not hesitate and hurriedly said, Sir, there is news from the palace. They said that there are clues about President Zhang. How is it? Yu Shernan hurriedly asked. Bai Ping glanced at the surroundings. Seeing that there was no one around, he carefully said, President Zhang is floating towards the grasslands. What? Yu Shernan exclaimed. He knew that the grasslands were the territory of the Turks. Why would Fengzi go there? To seek death? This brat was not usually such a brave person. Moreover, even if the few of them went there to seek death, what was the use? After thinking for a long time, he still could not come up with a conclusion. He continued to ask, what other news is there? When will Fengzi return? Also, why did he go to the grasslands? The series of questions made by Ping's mind a little confused. Fortunately, his mind was still agile. After thinking for a while, he replied, there is no news for now. As for when President Zhang will return, His Majesty did not say. However, His Majesty seems to have written a letter to Lu Guogong and the others. As for what he said, I do not know. Yu Shernan frowned. He was clearly dissatisfied with this answer. However, he also knew that it was not easy to obtain such news from the palace. Therefore, he did not fuss too much. Chapter 1906. However, why did Li Erlang give Qing Yaojin a divorce letter? Could it be that he wanted this guy to find a way to bring Fengzi back? That should be the case. Li Erlang was also worried about Fengzi, so he wouldn't sit by and do nothing. Thinking of this, he finally felt a little comforted. However, Fengzi went to the grassland this time, so it was inevitable that she would be in danger. No, he had to find those old guys to discuss countermeasures. Thinking of this, he glanced at Bai Ping, took out a silver ingot from his sleeve, and handed it over. His eyes were cold. Go back and continue to investigate. If there is any news, immediately inform the old man. Also, today's matter cannot be known to a third person. After saying this, he didn't care about the other party's reaction and turned to walk to the other classroom. Chu Suiliang was teaching in the classroom. When he saw Yu Shernan looking at the door with a gloomy face, he knew that something big had happened. He hurriedly threw down the book in his hand and said to the students, "It's time for self-study." After saying this, he turned and walked out of the door. As he walked, he said to Yu Shernan, "What's wrong? Oh guy. This is not a good place to talk. Let's go." Yu Shernan's face was still gloomy. With his hands behind his back, he walked quickly to the other classroom. As he walked, he said to Chu Suiliang, "Let's go separately. Call the other old guys out and gather at Fengzi's residence in 15 minutes. Hearing this, Chu Suiliang's face changed. He knew that something big had happened. Without hesitation, he walked quickly to the other classrooms. 15 minutes later, in front of Zhang Feng's residence. Yu Shernan glanced at the people in front of him. After confirming that they were all present, he waved his hand and said, "Come in and talk." Although the others didn't know what had happened, they knew from the old guy's face that it was definitely not a small matter. And now, the only one who could be considered a big matter was Fengzi. Could something have happened to Fengzi? Everyone looked at each other and their faces were not good. However, they didn't speak immediately. Instead, they went into the room together. In the room, Yu Shernan sat on a chair and glanced at everyone. "I think you all have guessed that something happened to Fengzi. What? What happened? What happened to him?" Everyone abruptly stood up from their chairs and looked at Yu Shernan with a look of bewilderment. To them, Fengzi was their disciple. Now that their disciple was in trouble, how could they, as his teacher, accept this? Especially the old Xiaozi, he regarded Zhang Feng as his disciple and son. Among these people, he couldn't guarantee that he was the one who treated Fengzi the best, but he could guarantee that he had the deepest feelings for Fengzi. Now something had happened to Fengzi? What was he going to do in the future? Yu Shernan could tell what was on everyone's mind. He waved his hand and gestured for everyone to take a seat. Then he said, "Just now, news came from the palace that Fengzi is floating towards the grasslands." Grasslands? Everyone exclaimed in surprise. At the same time, they were also somewhat astonished. The first thing they thought of was why Fengzi wanted to go to the grassland. Then he thought about how dangerous the grasslands were. Wouldn't he be courting death if he went there? They couldn't understand Fengzi's actions. In other words, they didn't understand Fengzi's thoughts at all. However, they were truly worried about Fengzi. Therefore, the old scholar spoke first. Why did Fengzi go to the grassland? Why did he go there? The old elementary scholar's question broke the silence in the room, as if pulling everyone back from their deep thoughts. All of a sudden, everyone's eyes were focused on Yu Shernan. Yu Shernan frowned. He didn't know the answer to these questions and didn't know how to answer them. However, looking at everyone's anxious eyes, he still said, "Old man doesn't know either." Hearing this, everyone's eyes flashed with a trace of loneliness. Seeing this, Yu Shernan continued, "However, news came from the palace that His Majesty had already sent letters to Qing Yaojin and Li Jing. As for the contents of the letters, we don't know." Letters? Everyone looked at each other, as if a glimmer of hope had been ignited. Because they all knew that Li Erlang had always regarded Feng Zi as a brother. Now that he had sent a letter, it must be to save Feng Zi. Thinking of this, Chu Suiliang glanced at everyone and said seriously, "Since His Majesty sent a letter, it must be to save Feng Zi." "That's right." Xueji nodded and stroked his sparse beard. A trace of worry flashed across his eyes. "However, we can't place all our hopes on the imperial court. What if there are people with bad intentions? Therefore, we have to think of a way to save Feng Zi as soon as possible." Hearing this, everyone nodded subconsciously. What he said made sense. Although the imperial court had a powerful army, they were only following orders. It was inevitable that some of them would slack off. This would be a great threat to Feng Zi's life. Therefore, Yu Shernan said, "Old man had the same idea. He asked you to come here to discuss how to save Feng Zi. Now that no one has any objections, how about we send our men to Xingzhou?" Chapter 1907. The old man still has a lot of servants in his family. They're willing to send a team. The one who spoke was Chu Suiliang. He used to be in power and had a lot of disciples under him. With his current family business, it was enough to send a team. The old man will also send a team. Xueji was excited. As a member of a clan, his family was also rich. Yu Shernan was delighted to see that everyone was enthusiastically signing up. He cupped his hands and said, "Then the old man will thank everyone on behalf of Feng Zi." Hearing this, everyone was unhappy. Feng Zi was their disciple after all. Why should he be thanked? Thus, Xueji said, "What are you talking about, Mr. Yu? Are we not Feng Zi's teachers?" Hearing this, Yu Shernan blushed. He lowered his head and inadvertently glanced at the worried old scholar. Curious, he asked, "Brother Zihuai, what's wrong?" The old scholar shook his head, seemingly ashamed. Everyone can send a team, but the old man. At this point, everyone came to a sudden realization. It turned out that the old scholar was worried because he couldn't send a team. In fact, no one blamed him for this. Because everyone knew the old scholar's situation. How could he send a lone person? Thus, Xueji patted the old scholar's shoulder and comforted him. "It's okay, Brother Zihuai. Feng Zi knows your intentions." Then he turned to everyone. "Since there's nothing else, everyone can go and prepare. After all, the more time we have, the safer Feng Zi will be." Everyone nodded, flicked their sleeves and left the room. The old scholar was the only one left in the room. In fact, he also wanted to send a team to help find Feng Zi, but his situation didn't allow it. Moreover, Feng Zi still had a family in Chang, and that he had to take care of. Family? It seemed that he hadn't seen the two girls in a long time. He wondered how they were doing. Well, he could take this opportunity to see the two girls and tell them about Feng Zi. Thinking of this, he flicked his sleeves and turned to walk towards the door. He didn't know why, but when he thought of returning to the Zhang mansion, he felt lighter. He arrived at the gate of the academy in a moment. The academy would usually prepare some sedan chairs for these old men. Therefore, the old Xiozai sat on the palanquin and wobbled towards Zhang mansion. At this moment, the entire Zhang mansion was busy. Ever since the two mistresses returned, the servants who made the cotton-padded clothes seemed to be more energetic than usual, and the output was also high. I wonder if these guys are trying to please the two mistresses? Or was he trying to please the two mistresses? Zhang Yuyao and Jingshu also enjoyed watching everything in front of them. Anyway, there was no harm in increasing the production. Right at this moment, a servant hurriedly ran in. "Ladies, Master Zihuai is here." The old Xiozai had been to the Zhang mansion before, so everyone in the Zhang mansion knew this amiable old man. At the same time, they also knew that this old man was the master of their master, so they didn't dare to neglect him. Zhang Yuyao was the same. because strictly speaking, the old Xianxia was the middleman between her and Prince Zhang. Therefore, she hurriedly lifted her skirt and walked towards the door as she said, "Come, let's go and welcome the old master." Now that Prince Zhang wasn't here, as Prince Zhang's fiancé, she naturally had to fulfill the duties of a disciple. Jing Shu also understood this and hurriedly followed. Just as they reached the door, they saw the old Xianxia getting off the palanquin. The two girls hurriedly went up and bowed. "Hello, master." The old Xianxia nodded and replied with a smile, "Yes, let's talk inside." After that, he raised his head and walked into the mansion with the two girls following behind. When they reached the front yard, the old Xianxia was attracted by the cotton-padded clothes in front of him. It wasn't that he hadn't seen it before, but it was precisely because he had seen it that he was surprised. When he saw it before, each servant could only make 1 or 2 cotton-padded clothes, but now, almost all the servants were making 4 or 5 cotton-padded clothes, and their hands were constantly threading the needles as if they didn't feel tired at all. Therefore, the old Xianxia looked at the two girls curiously. "How is the production of cotton-padded clothes now?" Zhang Yuyao stepped forward and smiled. "The production is almost twice as high as before, maybe even 1.5 times. So good?" The old Xianxia widened his eyes and looked at the cotton-padded clothes on the floor in disbelief. "I really didn't expect that the production of cotton-padded clothes would increase so much without Feng Zi here." After that, he seemed to have thought of something and turned to the two girls. "Come to the hall, the old man has something important to tell you." The two girls looked at each other, faintly ominous. Because there weren't many things that could make the master nervous, and one of them was Prince Zhang. Prince Zhang hadn't returned yet. Could it be about Prince Zhang? Thinking of this, Zhang Yuyao lifted the hem of her dress and quickly followed. Jing Shu was more rational. She glanced at the servant and ordered, "Immediately pour 3 cups of good tea to the hall, and then make sure no one is allowed to approach the hall." Chapter 1908. With that, she hurried to catch up. In the hall, the old scholar paced back and forth with his hands behind his back, thinking about what to say to the two girls. At this moment, the two girls walked into the hall. Zhang Yuyao stepped forward and asked with concern, "Sir, do you have any news about Prince Zhang?" The old scholar looked at the two girls meaningfully and nodded. "Yes, there is news about Feng Zi, but..." At this point, his eyes flashed with worry. "But Feng Zi is not in a good situation now. I heard that he is floating towards the grassland." "What?" Zhang Yuyao exclaimed in disbelief. As a girl, although she did not know much about national affairs, she knew that the grassland was the hinterland of the Turks. If Prince Zhang went there, would he still be alive? What if something happened to Prince Zhang? What would she do? Thinking of this, she could not help but feel sad. Jing Shu, on the other hand, was different. She was usually more knowledgeable and had a broader vision. The first thing that came to her mind was why Prince Zhang went to the grassland. That was the territory of the Turks. Going there was no doubt that he would die. Prince Zhang would not be so stupid to do such a brainless thing. Therefore, she began to guess in her heart. The old scholar saw that the two girls did not speak and thought that they were too sad. He quickly comforted them. "Girls, don't be sad. Although Feng Zi is floating towards the grassland, he is not in danger for the time being." "Really?" Zhang Yuyao suddenly raised her head and looked at the old scholar expectantly. Jing Shu was also awakened by the conversation between the two. She quickly looked at the old scholar and asked hopefully, "Sir, what is going on?" She had a feeling that there was something behind this. Prince Zhang had no reason to go to the grassland, but she could not figure out why. Now, she could only ask for help from her teacher. The old Xianxia didn't beat around the bush. He looked at the two women and said seriously, "That's right. There's news from the palace that Qing Yaojin and Li Jing have gone to rescue Feng Zi. The emperor has also given the order to rescue Feng Zi. The old men on the mountain have also volunteered to send their servants to look for Feng Zi. So you don't have to worry." Hearing this, the two women's hearts finally calmed down. If His Majesty gave the order, Prince Zhang shouldn't be in any danger. After all, the emperor was the most powerful person in the world. If he couldn't save her, then who could? There were also those gentlemen on the mountain. Basically, all of them were highly respected people. If they were willing to help, Prince Zhang wouldn't be in any danger, right? Thinking of this, Zhang Yuyao finally revealed a smile. Thank you, sir, for your hard work for Prince Zhang this time. We sisters would like to salute you on behalf of Prince Zhang. After saying this, she pulled Jingshu and respectfully bowed to the old Xiaozai. The old Xiaozai didn't hold back and accepted the salute with ease. He was Zhang Feng's teacher in name, so he could accept this salute. The two women had just stood up and were about to speak when the sound of footsteps came from outside the door. A servant came in with a cup of tea. Zhang Yuyao looked at Jingshu and instantly understood. This must have been arranged by Jingshu. She couldn't help but praise Jingshu in her heart. Then she looked at the old Xiaozai and realized that after talking for so long, they still hadn't invited him to take a seat. With a guilty expression, she said, "Sir, please take a seat. We sisters have been rude. You've been here for so long and we still haven't invited you to take a seat." After saying this, she personally picked up a cup of tea and handed it to the old Xiaozai. She bowed and said, "Sir, please have some tea." The old Xiaozai naturally didn't care about such details. Those who could come to Zhang Mansion were naturally family. So he casually found a seat and sat down. He smiled and said, "You're welcome. We're all family." Jingshu nodded and said with a smile, "Sir, you're right." Then the two women didn't stand on ceremony. They both sat down and talked about the cotton-padded clothes in the yard. At the same time, on the main street of Cheng, there were people coming and going, and it was very lively. Peddlers, servants, and others weaved in and out of the crowd, shouting all kinds of songs. They were like fish swimming in the sea, doing whatever they wanted. There was a dazzling array of delicacies on the side of the street. There were wontons, steamed biscuits, and so on, emitting bursts of delicious aroma. Along the way, there were soldiers walking back and forth. They were wearing armor and holding triangular bayonets. They were extraordinary and added a solemn atmosphere to the street, making people feel intimidated. They were sent by the Ministry of War to patrol. Since the Xuanwu Gate incident, there had been casualties in Cheng. Li Shimin gathered the ministers for a discussion and thought that it was useless to just stand guard. They had to do something practical. Although they knew that the Xuanwu Gate incident was a farce, they wanted to prevent the same thing from happening in the future. Li Shimin ordered that 12 teams of soldiers would be arranged to patrol Cheng and city every day. They would be changed every 2 hours. Although it cost some soldiers, it greatly increased the sense of security of the people. Think about it. If there were any thievery, burning, killing, and looting in Cheng and city, the people could immediately report to the patrolling soldiers. In this way, they could stop it immediately. Chapter 1909. Regarding this matter, the people praised His Majesty for being wise. Although the Xuanwu Gate incident happened before, His Majesty had already issued an edict. The people let go of the grudges in their hearts and even secretly thought of His Majesty's achievements. His Majesty did some wrong things, but there was nothing to say about the people. He could always be called an emperor who loved the people like his own children. Thinking of Emperor Yang of Sui, His Majesty could be called wise. There was also the dethroned Crown Prince Li Jianqing. Even if this guy ascended the throne, he might not do as well as His Majesty. Therefore, the people were still happy to support Li Shimin. Of course, the shoulder-bearer Huzi also thought so. At that time, he went to see the edict with his own eyes. His Majesty said it so sincerely, it was obvious that he was sincerely remorseful. Since His Majesty was sincerely remorseful, it meant that he was a wise emperor. Since he was a wise emperor, it meant that his future days would be better. Thinking of this, his footsteps unconsciously became lighter. The corner of his mouth raised and he shouted, "Steamed buns, good steamed buns, 1 copper coin each." At this moment, a group of soldiers walked over. Hu Zi was delighted and hurriedly went up to them. "Sir, how about a few steamed buns?" The leading soldier stopped and looked at the white steamed buns in front of him. He couldn't help but swallow his saliva and wanted to take it. However, when he thought of His Majesty's order, if anyone dared to take things from the people, their hands would be chopped off or their official position would be removed. After thinking for a while, he shook his head and said, "No, His Majesty's order is not to take anything from the people. Otherwise, your hands will be chopped off." After saying this, he raised his head, straightened his military uniform, and started patrolling again. Wuxia was a little confused. He didn't expect His Majesty to give such an order. Not to take anything from the people. Otherwise, your hands will be chopped off? Wasn't this too strict? However, on second thought, His Majesty seemed to be protecting him. This could prevent the soldiers from filling their pockets while patrolling. Thinking of this, he felt a wave of respect for His Majesty. Fine, no one would eat it. He could sell it for a few more money. Just as he was about to take the load and leave, a shout came. "Wuxia, Wuxia!" Wuxia turned his head and saw Wuxia running over with a load. He was delighted and hurriedly went up to him. "Wuxia, aren't you selling glutinous rice wine near Zhang Mansion? Are you done?" As he spoke, he patted the jar of fermented glutinous rice on the pillar, his heart filled with envy. Wuxia, on the other hand, didn't think much of it. He grabbed Wuxia's right hand and said excitedly, "Let's go to that corner. Lao Tzu will tell you a big piece of news from the Zhang residence." "Big news in Zhang Mansion?" Wuxia scratched his head and was a little confused. He was about to ask, but found that his right hand was not listening to him. He turned his head and saw that it was Wuxia who was about to pull him away. He quickly said, "Wait, I'll go carry the load first." After he finished speaking, he flung Wuxia's hand away and picked up the pole in a few strides. He turned around and patted Wuxia on the shoulder. "Let's go. Lao Tzu wants to see what kind of big news you have." Wuxia didn't waste any time. He held onto the pole and walked towards the corner they had agreed on earlier. After standing still, the two of them put down their burdens and sat on the ground. Wuxia looked at the pillar and said with a curious look, "Tell me now, what on earth is going on?" "Let me tell you." Wuxia smiled and turned his head to look around. Seeing that there was no one around, he looked at Wuxia. "Just now, one of my men said that the thing that appeared in Chang city a few days ago was made by President Zhang." "What?" Wuxia exclaimed and his eyes widened. To be honest, he had been selling steamed buns in Chang city for the past few years. He could be considered a wily old fox. He had heard all kinds of news. It was either that the rich family had married a widow, or that the family's official had his property confiscated. However, this Zhang mansion was a little different. Every time the news came out, it almost shocked Chang city. For example, in the past, there was an academy, and then there was the braised meat, and so on. There were too many to count. At first, everyone thought that this guy was crazy. But later, when they had a taste of the sweetness, well, it was really delicious. But this time, it was a little too shocking, wasn't it? The hot air balloon last time was actually made by President Zhang? This was a little unbelievable. Therefore, he looked at Wuxia with a puzzled look and asked, "Is what you said true? Why do I feel that you are bragging? No matter how awesome President Zhang is, it is impossible for him to go to the sky, right?" Wuxia was unhappy when he heard that. He glared at him and said, "This is the news that Lao Tzu found out with great difficulty. How dare you say that Lao Tzu is bragging?" After that, he stared at Wuxia and said unforgivingly, "To tell you the truth, not only did President Zhang make that thing that can go to the sky, I also heard that he went to Xianxia and blew up the Turkic camp." "What?" Wuxia jumped 8 feet high. That was 2F** King explosive, wasn't it? Blew up the Turkic camp? How was that possible? Xianxia was at least a few hundred miles away from Chang. How did he get there? Taking a step back, even if he blew up the Turkic camp, he wouldn't be able to survive. Chapter 1910. President Zhang was not stupid. How could he do such a brainless thing? He felt more and more that this guy was bragging. Therefore, he narrowed his eyes and stared at Wuxia. He asked, "Wuxia, are you crazy? Otherwise, why would you say such nonsense?" "You're the one who's crazy." Wuxia slapped Wuxia's head and said angrily, "Lao Tzu has a relative who works in the Zhang mansion. I heard this from my relative." This roar instantly attracted the attention of the passers-by. They all looked over. This street was not big, but it was not small either. People often saw each other, so Wuxia was also affected. The moment they saw Wuxia mention Principal Zhang, quite a few busybodies all gathered around, discussing animatedly. Zhu, what did you say about President Zhang? Did he go to heaven? Is he an immortal? I heard that people with the surname Zhang were reincarnations of immortals. Could it be that President Zhang is one too? This brother's words were not groundless. The ancients had been pursuing the path of immortality since ancient times. Even ordinary people could not avoid it, especially during the Sui, Tang, and Northern Song dynasties. Due to the respect of the ruling class, Taoism was extremely prosperous and had a great influence on society. Taoism's philosophy, life-preserving techniques, spells, and regulations were also more perfect. As for why Zhang Feng was an immortal, this was the speculation of the common people. The source was the founder of Taoism, Zhang Daoling. Thinking about it, both of them had the same surname. Now that Zhang Feng had made such a divine object, the crowd could not understand for a while. Naturally, they connected all of this to Zhang Feng. They thought that this Zhang Feng might be the successor of Taoism, or even an immortal on earth. Of course, all of this was just the crowd's speculation and could not be confirmed. Zhu saw that the crowd was getting more and more mysterious, and he could not help but feel satisfied. He glanced at Huzi from time to time, as if to say, "Look, even if you don't believe in Lao Tzu, there are plenty of people who do." Therefore, he scanned the crowd and continued, "I don't know if President Zhang is a god, but..." At this point, he paused for a moment, as if he was deliberately whetting everyone's appetite. Looking at everyone's impatient look, his vanity seemed to have been greatly satisfied, and then he slowly said, "However, I heard that President Zhang not only went to Xingzhou to bomb the Turkic camp, but also personally went down to remove one of Xieli's big legs." Everyone's eyes widened. It was as if their breathing had stopped at this moment. At first, they had come with the mentality of watching a good show. After all, everyone was curious about the unknown. However, the more he heard, the more he felt that something was amiss. Motherfucker! Not only did President Zhang blow up the Turkic camp, she even personally charged into the Turkic camp and removed one of Xieli's legs? Initially, when they heard this, they still had a trace of doubt in their hearts. Although many of them had never met Zhang Feng, they had heard of him before. How could they have charged into the Turkic camp? However, looking at Zhu expression, they didn't think it was fake. In addition, this guy's usual behavior made it even more impossible. Therefore, everyone tacitly agreed in their hearts. Then they thought again. Who was Xieli? He was a hungry wolf on the grassland. Although he ascended the throne smoothly, which of the generals who could unify the grassland was not a fierce general who could fight against 100 people alone? Could President Zhang charge into the Turkic camp? Unless this guy was really a god on earth? Actually, it was really possible. President Zhang had done so many things that humans couldn't do in the past. She might really be the reincarnation of a god. For a moment, everyone was skeptical. They believed that Zhang Feng was a god, but they didn't believe it. They believed it because this guy had done a lot of things that humans couldn't do. They didn't believe it because no one had really seen a god and only heard some legends. Now that this rumor suddenly appeared, no one could accept it. For a moment, complicated emotions intertwined in everyone's mind. They racked their brains but still couldn't get an answer. Finally, a teenager couldn't help but speak. He frowned and said, "Zhu, where did you hear this news from? Is it true? Don't make a fool of yourself?" What he said was true. The streets of Chang were crowded. No matter who knew this explosive news in less than 2 hours, no, in the time it took to burn a stick of incense, the whole Chang city would be abuzz. When Zhu heard this, he was a little annoyed. Lao Tzu had talked for a long time, and you still have doubts. He stood up and glared at everyone. Does Lao Tzu look like a liar? To tell you the truth, I have a relative who works in the Zhang mansion. This news was spread by him. It's definitely first-hand and absolutely true. When everyone heard this, they looked at each other and suddenly understood. It turned out that the news was spread by the Zhang mansion. In that case, it was much more reliable. President Zhang really blew up the Turkic camp and took off one of Xieli's legs. If this was true, those Turkic bastards wouldn't dare to come to the Tang dynasty for a few years. This was great news for the Tang dynasty. Chapter 1911. President Zhang had become a hero of the Tang dynasty. In an instant, Zhang Feng's image in the hearts of the crowd grew. A few people even looked up at the sky, trying to find traces of the hero in their hearts. At this moment, Huzi also believed in Zhang Feng's heroic deeds. Just now, he was still doubting. Thinking about it, he really shouldn't have. He blushed and said, "I really shouldn't have just now. I've decided to stay at home and worship President Zhang's memorial tablet every day." Before he finished speaking, Zhu Zi slapped him. Memorial tablets are for the dead. If you really respect President Zhang, then set up a deity tablet for President Zhang. Zhu Zi's words were originally unintentional, but it attracted a fierce reaction from the crowd. That's right. I also want to set up a deity tablet for President Zhang at home. I also want to set up one. A person like President Zhang deserves a deity tablet. Everyone raised their right hands and clenched their fists. The crowd was excited. They were all from Guangzhou, and the people of Guangzhou had always had a kind of belief that country first, home second. This kind of concept of sacrificing oneself for the country was incomprehensible to ordinary people. This was also the reason why Li Shimin had been recruiting soldiers in Guangzhou. And now, Zhang Feng had rushed into the Tujue camp alone and defeated Shili. In their eyes, that was the performance of a great hero. They were never stingy to great heroes. Although they were all ordinary people and couldn't take out anything good, they could still offer offerings. So, as if they had discussed it, they all went home to prepare a deity tablet for Zhang Feng. As they walked, they also talked about Zhang Feng's heroic deeds. Soon, the news spread. However, just as it spread, it caused a huge uproar on the streets of Chang. Because many people didn't believe that the thing flying in the sky a while ago was Zhang Feng. How could a person go up to the sky? This was simply nonsense. If anyone could go up to the sky, then wouldn't they become immortals? Towards these questions, Zhu Zi and the others were a little unhappy. They were people who firmly believed that Zhang Feng was in the heavens. Now that these questions were being asked, wasn't it a slap to their faces? Thus, Zhu Zi and the others started to argue with these people who didn't believe them. For a moment, the streets of Chang were divided into two factions. One faction was led by Zhu Zi, who firmly believed that Zhang Feng could ascend to the heavens and attack the Turkic camp. The other faction was led by Fu Gongzi, who did not believe that Zhang Feng could ascend to the heavens. Actually, this was understandable. Many of these rich young masters didn't like Zhang Feng. Why do you have so much gold, silver, and treasures? You're also so talented, and you even have 2 beautiful wives. What about me? I don't have anything. When I get home, my father even compares me to you. Naturally, I feel unbalanced. However, Zhu Zi did not care about this. He pulled the crowd and scolded them. Things like President Zhang being able to ascend to the heavens and President Zhang being awesome. In any case, they just said whatever was amazing. The confidence of some of the rich young masters was greatly damaged. Some even couldn't take it and had to raise their hands and surrender. Only then did Zhu Zi give up and continue to promote Zhang Feng's glorious deeds. Zhang Feng, who was thousands of miles away, knew nothing about what was happening on the streets of Chang. At this moment, he was lying on the hot air balloon. His eyes were half closed, as if he was not asleep. Gusts of cold wind blew, causing him to shiver. Then he slowly opened his eyes and glanced down. What appeared in front of him was a yellow color, as if it was rendered by a painter's brush. It was a little blurry. He rubbed his eyes, trying to see everything clearly. Finally, a cold wind blew and took away a lot of yellow. He saw clearly that there was a desert below. Countless sand and gravel were rolling in the wind. He was a little confused and subconsciously asked, "Where is this? The desert?" Looking at the terrain in front of him, it should be the desert. However, wasn't he in Xingzhou? Why was he in the desert? What the F***ck was going on? He shook his head and tried to remember everything that happened in Xingzhou. After a while, the memory emerged bit by bit. It turned out that after blowing up the Turkic camp, a gust of wind blew the hot air balloon away. At that time, because the wind was too strong, the hot air balloon could not be controlled. They could only wait for death. In addition, they had not eaten and were already hungry. They all fell asleep and slept until now. These were nothing. However, they were now in the desert. Once they crossed the desert, they would be in the territory of the Turkic people. Now, the Turkic people hated him to the bone. If he went there, he would die. Thinking of this, Zhang Feng could not sit still. He stood up and roared at Xianxia and the others, "You bunch of reckless dogs, get up quickly. We'll be in the grassland soon." Grassland? Zhang Sun was the first to wake up. He rubbed his eyes and looked at Zhang Feng with a little anger. He joked, "What grassland? Feng Zi, are you crazy? Don't disturb me. I dreamed of eating drumsticks." After that, he turned his head and was ready to sleep again. Zhang Feng could not stand it. He went forward and slapped him. He said angrily, "Why are you still sleeping? If you continue sleeping, you'll die. Wake up quickly." Chapter 1912. After beating up Zhang Sun, he rushed over. It seemed that he was still angry, and he beat up Xianxia and Dugo who were sleeping. "Feng Zi, are you crazy?" Xianxia rubbed his sleepy eyes and blurted out. He was already hungry, and he had just eaten braised meat in his sweet dream, but he was woken up by this guy. He was naturally dissatisfied. As for Dugo, he was clearly still sleeping and enjoying. How could he have expected to be woken up? He originally wanted to curse, but when he opened his eyes and saw that it was Zhang Feng, he was a bit scared. He could only timidly ask, "Feng Zi, what are you doing? I just saw the entrance to the lovely spring brothel, and I haven't entered yet." Hearing this, Zhang Feng was furious. At this time, these dogs were still thinking about eating, drinking, whoring, and gambling. Thus, he pointed at the sky and angrily glared at everyone. He scolded, "You dogs only know how to eat and drink all day. Who knows where we're floating now? Hurry up and think about how we're going to get back." When these words came out, everyone instantly became spirited. Because they had been sleeping all this time, they really didn't know where they were floating. However, looking at Feng Zi's current expression, it seemed very serious. They didn't hesitate and leaned over the railing to check. It didn't matter when they looked, but their legs seemed to not listen to them, and all of them went limp. Where was this? Why was there a patch of yellow everywhere? And there was a sky full of yellow sand? Was the ground also full of sand? They seemed to have never seen this place before. They sat on the hot air balloon, feeling waves of powerlessness coming from their bodies. After a while, Xianxia seemed to have recovered. He looked at Zhang Feng and asked anxiously, "Feng Zi, where are we? How did we float here?" When these words came out, Zhang Sun and Dugo also seemed to have calmed down. They nodded in unison. "Feng Zi, what's going on?" Looking at everyone's appearance, Zhang Feng wanted to laugh. Weren't they all very tough just now? Why were they scared now? He originally wanted to scare them, but when he saw the situation in front of him, he decided against it. Thus, he said with a serious face, "This should be the desert. In other words, we are only one step away from the grassland." Great desert? Everyone looked at each other in confusion. They didn't know much about the desert, but when they heard that it was only a step away from the grassland, they couldn't help but shiver. One had to know that beyond the desert was the grassland, and the grassland was the hinterland of the Turks. And he had just blown up the Turkic camp. If he went over now, wouldn't he be sending himself to his death? Thinking of this, everyone quivered and looked at Zhang Feng. "Feng Zi, hurry up and think of a way. If we continue to drift in that direction, we will definitely die." Zhang Feng was originally thinking of a solution, but after being called, he panicked a little. He glared at everyone. "What's the rush? Do you want to die? If you don't think of a way, you'll really die." Xianxia looked at everyone and said anxiously, "Now that we are all in the desert, hurry up and think of a solution." Zhang Feng waved his hand impatiently. In fact, he didn't have any good ideas. When the hot air balloon was successfully made, it didn't have the function of turning. It could only change its direction slightly with the weight, so some sandbags were placed. However, there wasn't any wind now. Even if he threw the sandbags, it would be useless. What should he do? Just as he was deep in thought, a warm wind blew. It was as gentle and delicate as a baby's hand. He suddenly trembled as if he felt a vitality. He quickly raised his hands and carefully felt the direction of the wind. This seemed to be blowing in the direction of Chang. That's right, it was the direction of Chang. With this wind, they could return to Chang. This made him overjoyed. He quickly said to everyone, "Hurry up and throw down all the useless things on the hot air balloon." The only way now was to use this wind to return to Chang. However, the weight on the hot air balloon would increase the wind resistance, so the best way was to throw away all the useless things and return to Chang, and as quickly as possible. However, Xianxia and the others didn't seem to understand. They looked at Zhang Feng with a confused face. "Why should we throw it away? How many steamed buns are there?" As he spoke, he walked to the package as if he was going to look for the so-called steamed buns. "You dog!" Zhang Feng stepped forward and kicked Xianxia. He glared at him and said angrily, "The wind is blowing towards Chang and now. If you don't throw away these useless things, when the wind stops, Lao Tzu will throw you down." Xianxia didn't get angry because Zhang Feng kicked him, because he heard something more important. The wind was blowing towards Chang. Didn't that mean he could return to Chang? Thinking of this, he quickly called Zhang Sun and the others. "You two come quickly. Didn't you hear what Fengzi said? This wind is blowing towards Chang. Quickly throw these things down." After that, he didn't care what was in the package and threw it down. Chapter 1913. Zhang Sunchong and Du Go were not to be outdone. They stepped forward and quickly cleaned up the hot air balloon. All of a sudden, the hot air balloon rose a few meters as the heavy objects were thrown down. At this time, another gust of wind hit. The hot air balloon began to sway with the wind and drifted toward Chang. Xianxia was so happy that he jumped up and down. He seemed to have forgotten that he was hungry. "Fengzi, how long will it take for us to return to Chang, and like this?" He missed the braised meat, roasted chicken, good wine, and the girls in the brothel in Chang, and very much. He couldn't wait to go back to Chang. The days in the hot air balloon were really not for humans. There was nothing he wanted, not even a bottle of wine. There were only a few men, and they had stayed there for a few more days. If they stayed there for a few more days, he reckoned that he would be driven crazy. He was not the only one who had this thought. Du Go and Zhang Sunchong also had this thought. Especially Zhang Sunchong. This guy was used to wandering around Chang and city. He drank and gambled every day. Although he had changed after meeting Zhang Feng, after experiencing life and death this time, he missed Chang and even more. He didn't miss anything else, but the girls in the brothel. "Without me, you must have had a hard time. Don't worry, when I go back this time, I will make it up to you." Thinking of this, his face was full of lewd smiles. Zhang Feng scoffed at all of this, especially when he saw the lewd smiles on everyone's faces. He felt a chill run down his spine. "Alright, stop having lewd thoughts. I reckon we'll be back in Chang, and in less than 2 days. If the wind gets stronger, it'll be even faster." When everyone heard this, they seemed to be more excited and cheered. The sky seemed to have heard everyone's cheers. A gust of wind blew again, and this time the wind was stronger than the previous one. The hot air balloon kept floating in the air and sped up. Soon they were out of the desert. Sure enough, as Zhang Feng said, the speed increased when the wind was stronger. A day later, they saw the outline of Chang and city. This time, Xianxia was surprisingly diligent. He did not sleep. When he saw that Chang and was already in sight, he quickly patted the sleepy Zhang Feng. "Fengzi, we're almost at Chang. Wake up quickly." Zhang Feng turned over and ignored Xianxia. He thought to himself, "Since we've arrived, why are you making such a fuss?" Seeing that Zhang Feng did not respond, Xianxia woke up Zhang Sunchong and Du Go. When the two of them heard that Chang and was here, they immediately stood up and surrounded the railing to admire the scenery of Chang. At this moment, they felt that the scenery in Chang and had never been so beautiful. There was no other reason. This was how they felt after surviving a disaster. People were like this. When there was no danger, they would always feel that everything around them was not pleasing to the eye. However, once they experienced life and death, they would instantly feel that everything around them was so beautiful and even precious. Now, the three of them had such thoughts. They had experienced what they thought was life and death. Now, looking at Chang and was a new scene. It was as if they thought that Chang and was their mother and they had finally returned to their mother's embrace. They looked at each other and their throats twitched. They hugged each other tightly as if they were about to cry. At this moment, the hot air balloon suddenly swayed and began to descend rapidly. The three of them seemed to have noticed that something was wrong. They quickly let go and leaned over the railing to look down. It did not matter if they looked down. A strong gust of wind blew from below. It was as if air was being pumped into their faces, causing their faces to distort. Xianxia quickly reached out to steady his face and continued to look down. However, he only saw the surrounding clouds. The objects underground seemed to be moving faster. This scared him out of his wits. He quickly shouted, "Hurry up and think of a way. What do we do now?" After saying that, he strode toward Zhang Feng. However, he realized that he had only taken half a step when his body tilted. He could only shout at Zhang Feng, "Feng Zi, hurry up and think of a way." Zhang Feng had not been asleep all this time. He had also noticed the swaying just now. His first reaction was that there was a problem with the hydrogen. His mind was working quickly. Xianxia shouted, which made him angry. "You are so damn noisy." Halfway through his words, there was a whoosh. The hot air balloon suddenly shriveled. Everyone's expression changed because they all knew that the hot air balloon was supported by the air inside. Now that the air had leaked, wasn't that, therefore, they quickly grabbed the iron wire and tried to find a way to survive. However, how could they withstand the pressure of the descent? The feeling of weightlessness suddenly hit them. Everyone fell to the ground. For a moment, screams were heard everywhere. It was as if the silent sky had been composed into a wonderful movement. Xianxia looked panicked. He stretched out his arm and tried to grab Zhang Sun to give himself some buffer. Zhang Sun was not stupid. He stretched out his arms. Then, Dugo also stretched out his arms. The three of them hugged each other tightly. Zhang Feng was the last to descend. Therefore, he was above the three of them. When he saw the three of them hugging each other tightly and ignoring him, he was instantly furious. He did not care about his unrecognizable face and shouted, "Bastard, wait for me!" Chapter 1914. Due to the airflow and pressure, Zhang Feng's voice was a little hoarse. Fortunately, the three of them still heard him. They reached out and hugged each other tightly. The speed of their descent became faster and faster. Everyone could only feel the cold wind cutting across their faces like knives. As they cried out in alarm, they were getting closer and closer to the ground. At that moment, they closed their eyes tightly, not daring to look down. It was not because they did not dare to look, but because the wind resistance was too strong. They could not open their eyes at all. Finally, a loud bang was heard, and pain spread through everyone's body. Zhang Feng slowly opened his eyes. He rubbed them and scanned his surroundings. It seemed like they had landed, but why did he not feel any pain? He looked down in confusion and saw Xianxia and the other two with their tongues out and their heads tilted to the side. They seemed to have fainted. Zhang Feng exclaimed and quickly jumped down from the three of them. Standing on the ground, he realized that the three of them were stacked in the shape of a human pyramid. The unlucky Du Go was at the bottom, Zhang Sun was in the middle, and Xianxia was at the top. Not only that, but the appearance of these three fellows had also changed. Their originally fair and clean faces were now bruised and swollen. Their clothes were also full of holes. The good thing was that they still had some haystacks under them. With these haystacks, they should not die, right? But it was not safe. Falling from such a high altitude, who knows? He could not stand still anymore. He quickly went forward and shook them violently. "Iron Bull, de Baneworm, don't die. Don't die." After saying that, he seemed to have thought of something and quickly reached out to check their breathing. Yes, there was still some breathing. This meant that they were not dead yet. However, why was his breathing so short? Could it be that they were about to stop breathing? His expression changed as he hurriedly roared. As he roared, he shook his head. "Iron Bull, don't die. If you die, that damn father of yours won't let me off. And Debang, although you're stupid, I can teach you. Don't die. And Buggy, didn't you say you were going to bring me to the brothel? Don't King die." He didn't know if Zhang Feng's roar had an effect, or if these three guys were really lucky, but they actually had a reaction. Xianxia was the first to open his eyes. He frowned as if he felt something was wrong. He subconsciously placed his right hand on his waist and cried out in pain, "My waist." As soon as he finished speaking, Zhang Sun also woke up. The veins on his forehead were bulging, and he was a little out of breath. Trembling, he said, "Is it that bastard is holding down Lao Tzu?" Hearing this, Cheng Chumo subconsciously looked down and saw that he was on top of Zhang Sun. He couldn't help but blush. "But it's me." "It's you?" Zhang Sun turned his head and glanced at him from the corner of his eye. He said angrily, "Then why aren't you King coming down? Don't you know how heavy you are?" "Oh." Cheng Chumo then nodded. Just as he was about to move his feet, he felt a sharp pain in his waist, which made it difficult for him to move. He glanced in front of him and saw Zhang Feng watching the show. He said angrily, "Feng Zi, you're King watching the show? Hurry up and help me down." Zhang Feng smiled and quickly went forward. He chose to ignore Cheng Chumo's scolding. After all, this guy was his human punching bag just now. Moreover, now was the time to save someone. How could he have the time to care about this? Cheng Chumo was carefully helped down by Zhang Feng. He sat down on the side. Zhang Sun felt a little better. He looked at Zhang Feng and said, "Feng Zi, help me up too. My waist can't take it anymore." Speaking of this, he seemed to have thought of something. He asked, "Where's that bastard Dabing?" Zhang Feng chuckled and tilted his head. "Isn't he just below you?" Zhang Sun Chong frowned and glanced down. It really was Dugo. Dugo was still unconscious. His face was bruised and his blood vessels were popping. It looked like he had been pressed down. Zhang Sun saw this and his expression changed. He quickly asked, "How did Dabing end up like this? He's not dead, is he?" "He shouldn't be dead, right?" Zhang Feng went forward and looked at Dugo. Then he looked at Zhang Sun and said jokingly, "If you continue to press him down, he might die." "Ah!" Zhang Sun exclaimed and grabbed Zhang Feng's shoulder. "Quick, help me up." Zhang Feng smiled and quickly helped Zhang Sun Chong up. Only then did Dugo, who was at the bottom, return to normal. "Feng Zi, go take a look at Dabing." Zhang Sun stood at the side and looked at Dugo worriedly. As soon as he said this, Zhang Feng instantly felt that there was true affection between these brothers. It could be seen from this trip to Xing State. However, just as he was about to save Dugo, Zhang Sun and Cheng Chumo's discussion came from behind him. "If this kid dies, who will pay for our next visit to the brothel?" Oh, that makes sense. It was obvious that Cheng Chumo was the one who had spoken the truth. Chapter 1915. Zhang Feng turned around and glared at the two before patting Dugo's pale face. "Dabing, wake up. Otherwise, these two bastards will take your money and go to the brothel." "Brothel? What brothel?" Dugo slowly opened his eyes and looked at Zhang Feng in confusion. "What do you mean by that?" Zhang Feng smiled. He knew that this guy would wake up once he mentioned the brothel. As expected, he chuckled. "Hurry up and get up." After that, he went forward to support Dugo and prepared to pull him up. Na Cheng's face changed when he thought of this guy. He cried out in pain. "Ach. My waist is broken." He was the one at the bottom of the human pyramid, so naturally he was under the most pressure. His waist was probably not feeling well at all. Zhang Feng understood, but it was impossible for him not to get up. He still persuaded him. "Chang, and city is just ahead. Don't tell me you don't want to go home?" As soon as he said that, Dugo seemed to be instantly energized. He glanced at the city gate and pretended to be strong. "Go home. I can do it. Help me up." Zhang Feng smiled. This guy was obviously not that strong, yet he was still pretending. However, his actions were praiseworthy. Without any hesitation, he helped Dugo to sit beside Cheng Chumo and the other man. As soon as they stood still, the three of them seemed to have found something funny. They pointed at Zhang Feng and laughed. This made Zhang Feng confused. Could it be that his clothes were also torn? He quickly checked and found that his clothes were indeed torn. However, he could still wear them. Compared to these three guys, he was much better. He said unhappily, "You guys still have the face to laugh at me. Look at your clothes." The three of them finally reacted. They had been thinking about how to escape and did not look at their appearances. Now that they looked at them, they were really King ugly. Each of them had a bloody nose and a swollen face. There were even straws on their heads. They were just like clowns. In fact, Zhang Feng himself was not much better. Most of his clothes were torn and there was a lot of straw on his head. However, he was not bruised and swollen. After all, he was at the top. After a burst of laughter, Zhang Feng looked at them and said seriously, "Chang and city is close at hand. Let's walk there. I'll treat your injuries when we reach the Zhang mansion." Cheng Chumo nodded. "No problem. Let's go." Just as he was about to get up, a sharp pain came from his disappointing waist. My waist? Dugo was the same. Just as he was about to get up, pain came from his waist. He wailed, "My waist hurts." Zhang Sunchong was a little better. He was in the middle, so his strength was neutralized. His waist was fine, but it was a little sore. Therefore, he looked at the two of them with a mocking expression. "You two want to visit a brothel in your current state? I'm afraid you can't even move." Cheng Chumo and Du Go were unhappy. Their faces turned red. They were about to refute when they saw Zhang Sunchong standing between them. He crossed his arms and said proudly, "Look, you still have to rely on Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu will help you back." Cheng Chumo and Du Go wanted to curse, but when they saw Zhang Sunchong helping them, they did not say anything. They just lowered their heads and tried to stand up. Zhang Feng could not stand by and watch. He helped Cheng Chumo and Du Go up and walked towards Chang and city. Although the two of them had a sore waist, they were usually in good health. Plus, they wanted to go home quickly. Soon, they reached Chang'an Avenue. However, as soon as they reached Chang'an Avenue, they heard some unusual things. They claimed that Principal Zhang had ascended to the heavens and had personally charged into the Turkic camp. There were even some who claimed that Principal Zhang was the reincarnation of a god. There were also some fellows who claimed that Principal Zhang could predict the future and would soon ascend to the heavens. Hearing all this, Zhang Feng's head was about to explode. When did he become so awesome? Reincarnation of an immortal? Pass away and ascend in 100 days? Lao Tzu did not want to die. Who was spreading rumors about Lao Tzu? With doubts and anger, Zhang Feng stopped a passerby and asked, "Brother, why are there rumors about me everywhere in Chang'an City? Who spread them?" "Rumors about you?" the passerby exclaimed. He looked Zhang Feng up and down and said disdainfully, "Do you think you are President Zhang? Do you think a beggar like you can pretend to be President Zhang, an immortal on earth?" The passerby secretly spat and left. Zhang Feng was confused. The whole Chang'an City was spreading rumors about him. How could he pretend not to know a living person in front of him? Was this guy blind? Or was he really blind? Just as he was thinking hard, Cheng Chumo's joking voice came. "Come on, look at you now. It's already an honor for people to treat you as a beggar." Zhang Feng suddenly understood. He looked down at his clothes and was speechless. Sure enough, it was human nature to judge people by their appearance. However, he was not such a vulgar person. He looked at Cheng Chumo unconvinced. "Lao Tzu is a beggar, aren't you? Why are you talking about this?" Chapter 1916. Lao Tzu is just angry. Cheng Chumo snorted and turned his head to the side. "It was the four of us who went to bomb the Turkic camp. Why did you become the hero when we came back? Why didn't anyone care about Lao Tzu and his brothers?" Zhang Sunchong and Du Go also reacted. They raised their heads to express their dissatisfaction. "Yes, we also contributed. Why didn't we get the same treatment?" Zhang Feng laughed. "It was Lao Tzu who made the hot air balloons and the gunpowder was also Lao Tzu. When he asked you guys to bomb the Turkic camp, you were all acting like cowards. It was Lao Tzu who held you back. Now, you even turned around and said that Lao Tzu was wrong? It was really King embarrassing him." Thinking of this, he was unhappy. He frowned and glared at the crowd. "All of you, shut up and stay here." After saying that, he ignored the crowd and quickly stepped forward to stop another passerby. However, this time he was smarter. He did not consider himself as Zhang Feng. Instead, he asked humbly, "Brother, when I first came here, I heard everyone talking about President Zhang. They even said that President Zhang is some kind of god. What is going on?" The passerby glanced at Zhang Feng. Seeing his tattered clothes, he thought that he was a beggar and did not want to answer. However, when President Zhang was mentioned, he seemed to be interested. He pretended to be knowledgeable and said, "If you want to talk about President Zhang, there is a lot to talk about." Back then, President Zhang ran a tavern by himself. At that time, he could not make ends meet and his life was extremely difficult. Hearing this, Zhang Feng was a little speechless. What did he mean by he could not make ends meet? Lao Tzu was not poor at that time, was he? Now, he could roughly imagine that the rumors in Chang and city were spread by these troublemakers. He wanted to curse, but when he thought of the source and the explosive news behind it, he felt as if his blood was boiling. Being praised by others doesn't seem to be a bad thing, right? Iron Bull and the others didn't even have the chance to be praised. Yes, that was the logic. When others didn't know who he was, it felt so good to hear them flatter him. He comforted himself. He purposely pretended to be humble and listened carefully. Looking at Zhang Feng, the passerby's vanity seemed to be greatly satisfied. He deliberately coughed twice and said with a serious face, "As for who was the first to talk about President Zhang in Chang and city? I really don't know. After all, there are so many people in Chang and city. There's no way to find out. But this discussion started a day ago. Also, I heard that President Zhang is an immortal. It's true. Many people in Chang and city have worshipped President Zhang." "What?" Zhang Feng exclaimed in disbelief. "Worship the deity position? How is this possible?" The deity position was for immortals. He never thought that the people in Chang and city would be so crazy. The passerby seemed to be very satisfied with Zhang Feng. He looked at Zhang Feng as if he were a country bumpkin. "You don't know about this, do you? People in Guangzhou are bellicose. President Zhang bombed the Turkic camp this time. In the eyes of the people in Guangzhou, he is a great hero. Also, speaking of this, he turned his head and looked around. When he saw that there was no one, he slowly approached Zhang Feng with a mysterious face. "Today, I heard that a woman from the Wang clan in Dong City became pregnant after worshipping President Zhang's deity position. You know, this woman from the Wang clan hasn't been pregnant for 3 years. It's all thanks to President Zhang that she is pregnant now." Zhang Feng was stunned. He stood there and didn't know what to say for a moment. Damn it. What did the woman's pregnancy have to do with Lao Tzu? And a woman who hasn't been pregnant for 3 years? This had nothing to do with Lao Tzu. Did these guys think that he was a child giving guanyin? At this moment, he felt that his head was in a mess. He could only hear a buzzing sound. But at this moment, the passerby leaned over again and said with a smile, "President Zhang is so awesome. When I go back, I'm going to let my wife have a try. Maybe she can make my family have children." After that, he turned and was about to leave. Suddenly, he thought of something. He took out several copper coins from the bag and counted them in his palm. He took out several coins and was about to give them to Zhang Feng when he felt that something was wrong. He simply handed them to Zhang Feng and said, "I'm happy today. Take the money and go drink with your brother." Zhang Feng was already petrified in place. He didn't react at all to what was happening in front of him. When the passerby saw that the beggar didn't react, he thought that he had made the beggar stupid. He simply grabbed Zhang Feng's right hand and stuffed all the money into it. Then, he flicked his sleeves and left. Zhang Feng was stunned. Cheng Chumo and the others behind him heard everything clearly. They looked at each other and wanted to laugh. But when they thought that Zhang Feng was still standing there in a daze, they went forward and patted Zhang Feng's shoulder. "Feng Zi, are you okay?" Zhang Feng trembled violently, only then did he recover. What the passerby said just now really made him speechless. How could a woman's pregnancy be related to Lao Tzu? Wasn't this normal? He wanted to vomit blood. He really felt that the people of Chang and were crazy.